Welcome to Level 1 to 100 Thought Experiments. This isn't a test. It's not a ranked list of brain teasers. It's a journey from the familiar edges of everyday curiosity to the strange, swirling depths of ideas that bend the very concept of reality. Each level doesn't necessarily get harder in the way a math problem might. Instead, they grow more complex, more abstract, more unsettling, or simply more mind-bending. Some experiments are moral puzzles, others are metaphysical. Some will make you question what's real, others might make you question who is doing the questioning. By level 1, you'll be smiling at a simple scenario. By level 100, you may not know where you end and the thought begins. You don't need a background in philosophy, just curiosity and a willingness to let go of certainty. So, take a breath, relax, and prepare to travel through 100 levels of thought that just might change how you see the world and yourself. Let's begin. Imagine there's a machine, perfectly engineered, that can give you any experience you want. You simply plug in, and for the rest of your life, you live inside a simulation so vivid, so rich in sensation, that you'd never know it wasn't real. You could choose to be a famous artist, a heroic explorer, a beloved leader, or someone who spends every day in pure joy, surrounded by people who adore you. Every possible pleasure and meaningful experience is available, and you wouldn't remember ever plugging in. Outside the machine, your body lies still in a pod, your brain being stimulated by advanced computers. But inside the simulation, you live a full life. It feels exactly like reality. There's no glitch, no hint that anything is artificial. The highs, the lows, the struggles, the triumphs, all feel authentic. You fall in love. You make mistakes. You learn. You grow. You feel pain, you overcome it, you feel alive, but none of it is real. Not the people you love, not the accomplishments, not the suffering you endure, or the meaning you think you found. It's all programmed. And here's the question: would you plug in? This thought experiment, proposed by philosopher Robert Nozick, isn't just about technology or simulation. It's a question about what we value. If all that matters is pleasure or satisfaction, then the experience machine should be irresistible. Why not choose a perfectly crafted life if it brings more happiness than the messy, unpredictable real world? But many people hesitate. Some even recoil. Why? Maybe it's because we value truth over comfort. Maybe it's because we want our lives to be connected to a reality beyond our own perception. Or maybe it's because part of what makes experiences meaningful is that they're earned, not delivered. There's something strange about knowing that your best friend, your greatest achievements, your deepest lessons were written into a code before you ever felt them. And what about the people you leave behind? Are you abandoning the real world, its problems, its people, its potential for a fantasy? You're walking down a quiet street when you spot a wallet lying on the sidewalk. There's no one around. You pick it up. Inside is a driver's license, several credit cards, and $500 in cash. You now face a decision: return the wallet exactly as you found it, return it, but keep the cash, or keep the whole thing and walk away. You know who it belongs to. Their address is just 2 blocks away. Returning it is easy, but you start thinking, maybe this person is wealthy. Maybe they wouldn't even miss the money. Maybe this is a chance to get ahead a little. On the other hand, you wouldn't want someone to keep your wallet if the roles were reversed. Then your mind shifts. What if this is a test? A hidden camera social experiment? What if someone's watching? Would that change what you do? And if it does, were you ever moral to begin with, or just afraid of being caught? You consider another possibility. Suppose you really need the money, rent is due, groceries are running low. Maybe taking the money is wrong, but isn't feeding yourself right? Would you be more moral for returning it, or more human for keeping it? Now flip it. Imagine the owner of the wallet is someone you despise. Maybe they hurt someone you care about. Would that make it easier to keep the cash, or even feel justified in doing so? And if so, does morality depend on how we feel about others? Or suppose the wallet belonged to someone famous, a billionaire. Does that make any difference? If it does, what does that say about your sense of justice, or your envy? The wallet doesn't speak. The money doesn't beg. The owner doesn't know you have it. But the moment has weight, not because anyone else is watching, but because you are, because your future self may remember this moment, may judge you, may even be shaped by what you choose to do. So The question lingers, what would you do with the lost wallet, and why? Imagine you're walking through a park on your way to work. You're dressed nicely, freshly ironed shirt, polished shoes, maybe a new coat. As you pass by a shallow pond, you notice a small child flailing in the water, clearly struggling, clearly drowning. There's no one else around. You're the only one who can help. The water isn't deep. You won't drown, you won't be hurt. But your clothes, they'll be ruined. Your morning, disrupted. Your day, changed. Maybe your whole week. Do you jump in? Most people don't hesitate. Of course you do. Of course you ruin your shoes. Of course you save the child. Because how could you not? A life is at stake. It would be unthinkable to walk past and do nothing. But here's the twist. Everyday children, just like that one, are dying from preventable causes, from diseases with cheap cures, from lack of clean water, from hunger. And you could help them right now without even leaving your home. A small donation, less than the cost of that ruined coat, could save a life. And yet, most people don't do it. So what changed? The child in the pond is right in front of you. You can see them, hear them. The urgency is visceral, but the child across the world, they're abstract, a number, a headline, out of sight, out of mind. And yet the moral math is the same. The drowning child forces us to confront a discomforting question. Why does distance dull our compassion? Why do we treat suffering we can see as more real than suffering we can only imagine? And if we accept that the child in the pond deserves saving, can we truly say the faraway child doesn't? You walk into a room filled with strangers, and to your surprise, everyone seems to love you. They laugh at all your jokes, compliment your personality, and seem genuinely interested in everything you say. You feel more confident, more seen, more alive than you've felt in years. The conversations flow naturally, and for once, you feel like you belong. Hours pass, and you leave the event glowing with happiness, thinking you've made real connections. But later, someone shows you proof. Everyone in that room was an actor, paid to treat you exactly the way they did. Every smile, every laugh, every compliment was scripted. None of it was real. Now ask yourself, was your experience any less meaningful? If you felt joy, connection, even growth in that moment, does the artificial origin of those feelings invalidate them? Or is the emotional reality of an illusion just as real as the truth? Imagine someone who always chooses the easiest path, not out of laziness, but out of pure optimization. They don't work harder, they don't burn the midnight oil, and they don't chase perfection. Instead, they solve problems just enough to get by. They rely on shortcuts, delegate when possible, and avoid reinventing the wheel. But strangely, their life seems to work. They meet deadlines. They succeed. People even think they're clever. Now, ask yourself, is this person a genius? We often associate genius with struggle, long hours, intense focus, the tortured artist or brilliant scientist, pushing the limits of human understanding. But what if genius can also look like someone who figures out how not to struggle? Someone who sees the shortcut no one else notices. Someone who refuses to waste energy doing what doesn't need to be done. If two people solve the same problem and one does it with elegance, speed, and minimal effort, who is smarter? The person who works the hardest or the one who makes it easy? The lazy genius thought experiment flips the story we usually tell about success. It makes us wonder whether brilliance has less to do with effort and more to do with clarity. Knowing what really matters, what doesn't, and what can be done with less. If your life works without struggle, without burnout, without pushing, do you deserve credit for it? Or suspicion? Mary has lived her entire life in a small, perfectly white and black room. She has never seen color. Every object in the room is black, white, or a shade of gray. But Mary is no ordinary person. She's a brilliant scientist. She specializes in the neurophysiology of vision. She knows every scientific fact there is to know about how humans perceive color. She knows about wavelengths of light, the anatomy of the eye, how cones and rods work, how the brain processes visual input. She knows what wavelengths correspond to what people call red or blue or green. She's read every paper, watched every black and white documentary, run simulations, mapped the entire experience of color in terms of physical data. But she has never actually seen color herself. Now, imagine one day, Mary leaves the room. For the first time, she sees a red rose. The question is, did she learn something new? If she already knew all the physical information about color vision, every fact, every detail, then theoretically, she should not be surprised. But if she is surprised or has a new kind of knowledge after seeing red, then that suggests that not all knowledge is reducible to physical facts. This thought experiment challenges materialism, the idea that everything, including consciousness, can be fully explained by physical processes. If Mary gains something, some understanding or feeling, just from the experience of red, then maybe subjective experience, or qualia, can't be captured by science alone. Some philosophers say yes, she learns what red looks like, and that this shows physicalism is incomplete. Others argue she doesn't learn a new fact, just gains a new ability, like the ability to recognize red on sight. But the deeper question it raises is, can consciousness be reduced to data? Or is there something about experience that is fundamentally beyond measurement? Something that only becomes real when it's lived? And if that's true, how much of reality are we missing right now, just because we haven't experienced it yet? Imagine you're dining at a local restaurant with a group of friends. The meal is good, the service is fine, and when the bill arrives, everyone starts figuring out their share, including the tip. There's an unspoken rule. Everyone usually tips a bit more generously when in a group, partly due to social pressure, partly out of fairness. But now picture a slightly different setup. Instead of everyone tipping individually, the restaurant adds a flat service fee and distributes it to the servers. Tipping is no longer required, and in fact, most people stop doing it. Why would they tip extra when it's already covered? That's fair, right? But then you learn something odd. When the restaurant switched to the flat fee system, overall tipping actually decreased, even when the fee was meant to match the average tip people used to leave. Over time, servers earn less, even though nothing about the service or food has changed. People say they value good service, yet they now contribute less than before. Why? Here's the dilemma. When tipping is voluntary, people often tip to be kind, fair, or generous, but also because they don't want to be the one who doesn't. There's social pressure, a feeling of personal responsibility. But when tipping becomes built-in or anonymized, that sense of individual action disappears. You're no longer choosing to be generous. You're just paying a fee. And that small change shifts the psychology entirely. Now, think bigger. What other things in life work like tipping? When do we act kindly only because others are watching, or because the system expects us to? And when the structure removes that choice, do we also lose a part of our moral engagement? Or is it better when generosity is built into the system, even if it feels less personal? At what point does doing the right thing stop feeling like a choice and start feeling like a bill? Imagine walking through a famous art museum. You stop in front of a breathtaking painting, something that's captivated viewers for centuries. You admire the brushstrokes, the color, the emotion. You're moved. And then someone walks up beside you and says, "That's not the original. It's a forgery." Suddenly the spell breaks. The awe fades. You feel tricked. But why? If the painting is visually identical to the original, so much so that not even experts can tell the difference, then what exactly has been lost? The image is the same. The emotional reaction is the same. So why do we value the authentic so much more than the fake? This thought experiment invites us to examine what we really mean when we talk about the value of art. Is it the physical object itself, the creative act behind it, the story, the status? Imagine two paintings. One is an original by a master like Van Gogh. The other is a perfect forgery created by someone who spent years mastering every detail. Even under a microscope, you can't tell them apart. They're both beautiful. They both evoke the same emotions. But one is worth millions, and the other is considered worthless. Why? Some argue the value lies in the artist's intent, that the original carries with it the energy, choices, and soul of the person who made it. Others say it's about the historical context, the journey the painting has taken through time, the exhibitions it's been in, who has owned it. Hamisitvani, a Carmelian Jo, Nem, Rendelkazik Ezel, a Turtanetel. The value of art forgery isn't just about paintings. It's about truth. It's about trust. It's about where we place meaning. And maybe, just maybe, it's about how much we need something to be real in order for it to matter. Imagine you're in a room, doing whatever you normally do when you're alone, reading, pacing, talking to yourself, or maybe just lying in bed scrolling through your phone. You feel completely unobserved, your guard down. Now imagine you find out that for the past week, a hidden camera has been recording everything. No one's seen the footage, yet. But they could. Suddenly, your memories of that week shift. The ordinary moments seem more vulnerable. That thing you muttered under your breath. The silly dance you did when no one was looking. The way you stared blankly at the ceiling for hours. These now feel exposed. But nothing has changed, really. The footage was always there. It's your awareness that has shifted. Now imagine you live your entire life with the knowledge that there's always a camera in the room. Not a literal camera necessarily, but a kind of ever-present observer. Maybe it's society. Maybe it's God. Maybe it's your future self. Maybe it's just the idea that everything you do is somehow part of the permanent record of the universe. How would you live differently? This thought experiment doesn't ask whether it's right or wrong to be observed. It asks something subtler. What's the difference between being watched and knowing you're being watched? Does your behavior become more ethical, more performative, more anxious, more artificial? Does the presence of observation make you better or just more constrained? And if no one is watching, are you truly free or simply unaccountable? Or here's the twist. Maybe there never was a camera. Maybe the room was always empty, always private, always yours. And now you have to ask, what parts of yourself only exist when no one else is looking? You do something wrong, lie to a friend, cheat a little, hurt someone's feelings. Then you feel bad, so you do something good. Donate, help someone, apologize to someone else. You tell yourself the good cancels the bad. Balance is restored. But does it? This is moral offsetting. The idea that a good deed can erase a bad one, like carbon offsets, but for your conscience. If you steal, then donate the same amount to charity. Are you even? Or have you just done one bad thing and one good thing? Maybe the key lies in who is affected. If I hurt you and then help someone else, it might make me feel better, but it doesn't undo the harm I caused you. It's not an apology. It's not justice. It's moral bookkeeping that benefits the accountant more than the victim. Maybe good and bad aren't numbers on a moral scorecard. Maybe they're separate threads, and each one still exists, no matter how much you weave around it. So, can you erase the past with goodness, or is true morality about facing what you did? What if you discovered that, since the moment you were born, everyone around you, your parents, teachers, friends, co-workers, even strangers, had been secretly instructed to treat you as someone extraordinary, not because you actually were, but as part of a massive psychological experiment? Imagine they were told to praise your every effort, to smile warmly at your mistakes, to celebrate even your smallest accomplishments as if they were groundbreaking. Every criticism you might have received was softened or hidden. Every failure reframed as a hidden success. All of this carefully designed, not to manipulate you out of cruelty, but to observe how a person raised in an environment of unrelenting affirmation would develop emotionally, intellectually, and morally. Would your self-esteem still feel authentic? Would your confidence collapse, knowing it was artificially inflated? Would you feel violated, or grateful for the life you've lived? And if the experiment was ending, and the real world, with all its indifference, its harshness, its honest feedback, was waiting for you on the other side of the truth, would you want to keep living in the lie, or finally step into a world where no one claps unless they mean it? Imagine you're given a cloak that renders you completely invisible. No one can see you. No cameras can detect you. You can walk through any building, listen to any conversation, take anything you want, and leave without a trace. You're not immortal, and you're not invincible, but you're unseen. No one will ever know you were there. Now ask yourself, what would you do? Would you spy on people? Would you eavesdrop on private conversations? Would you steal something just to see if you could get away with it? Would you sneak into a movie theater, a government facility, a celebrity's house? Or would you do nothing at all? The invisibility cloak doesn't just test your imagination, it tests your morality. The ancient philosopher Plato used a version of this thought experiment in his story of the Ring of Gyges, where a shepherd finds a ring that makes him invisible. The question was simple. If people knew they could never be caught, would anyone still be just? Do we do the right thing because it's right, or just because we're afraid of punishment? Invisibility isn't just physical. Sometimes we act as if we're invisible online, behind usernames, hidden in crowds, lost in algorithms. Does that change how we behave? Are we kinder when we're seen and crueler when we're not? The invisibility cloak shows us something strange. The fear of being watched might be one of the last things keeping civilization in check. So, if you were completely unseen, not just by people, but even by history, what kind of person would you become? And more importantly, would that person still be you? Imagine waking up one day and being told that everything you've ever known, every memory, every relationship, every hardship, every joy was simulated. You've been inside an experience machine your entire life. But here's the twist. You didn't choose to enter it. Unlike the classic scenario where you're offered the chance to plug into a machine that gives you perfect experiences, this version works in reverse. You've already been inside it. The question now is whether you want to leave. The real world might be better, or it might be worse. It might be lonely, or harsh, or empty. But it would be real, whatever that means. So, what matters more, the truth or the life you've known? If everything felt real to you, was it ever fake at all? Would you walk away, or stay inside the only life you've ever loved? Imagine you're walking through a lab, and you see a sealed glass container. Inside is what appears to be a baby, happily playing, covered head to toe in melted chocolate. You're told it's not a real baby. It's a highly advanced robot. It can simulate emotions, mimic crying, laughing, facial expressions, everything. It reacts like a real baby. You're also told that this is part of a sensory testing experiment for a new product. The engineers assure you that the machine doesn't feel anything. It only simulates. But still, there it is. Chocolate smeared across its synthetic cheeks, cooing and giggling, occasionally reaching for its toes like a real infant. You find yourself feeling uneasy. Something about the image just feels wrong. It doesn't matter how many times you're told it's not conscious. It doesn't matter that it can't suffer. Your gut reaction is discomfort, maybe even revulsion. And here's the thought experiment. Why? Is your reaction based on empathy? Is it a moral intuition? Or is it a learned cultural response? If we know with absolute certainty that the robot feels nothing, and no harm is occurring, is it still wrong to treat it this way? Would it be wrong to humiliate, mock, or destroy something that perfectly mimics a human child if we're certain it's not alive? Would your answer change if it looked like an adult, or an animal, or if it looked completely non-human, but still made baby sounds? Imagine you're offered a drug that permanently eliminates all feelings of embarrassment, guilt, or shame. You'd still know right from wrong, but you'd never feel bad about anything you did. Would taking it make you a better person, or a worse one, or neither? You're in a silent white room. In front of you, a red button. A voice speaks. If you press this button, one innocent person in the world will die instantly. You won't know who. No one will know it was you. In return, you'll receive $1 billion, tax-free, no consequences. That's it. One anonymous death. Endless wealth. You could do good with the money, save lives, end poverty. Or you could vanish, live in luxury, never think about it again. Maybe you'd convince yourself that the person who died was old or sick or would have died anyway. Maybe you'd try not to think about it at all. But someone would die. A child, a parent, a stranger asleep in their bed, gone instantly without knowing why. Would it matter if the button killed someone already terminally ill? Would it matter if it chose someone at random from a population of billions? What if it was someone who, by sheer accident, would have died in a car crash tomorrow? So, would you press the button? Imagine you're walking down a street and see a man about to spray graffiti on a wall. You're against vandalism, but just before you say something, he turns to you and says, "Look, if I don't do it, someone else will. At least I'm using environmentally friendly paint." This is a small version of a much bigger idea, moral fungibility. The idea that moral responsibility can be swapped or transferred, like interchangeable parts in a machine. It plays out in everything from individual decisions to massive institutional systems. The core question is, if someone else will do the bad thing anyway, is it morally wrong for you to do it? Let's take a deeper example. Imagine a pharmaceutical company hires you as a researcher. You discover the company engages in practices you find ethically questionable, price hikes on life-saving drugs, exploitation of loopholes to avoid regulation, and data manipulation. You consider quitting, but your boss says, if you leave, we'll just replace you. And the next person might not care as much as you do. At least you're trying to make things better from the inside. This justification is surprisingly common, especially in morally gray professions. Arms dealers, tobacco executives, oil lobbyists, even people working in exploitative industries often tell themselves the same story. If not me, then someone else. And maybe worse. So the moral question becomes, does inevitability reduce responsibility? It's tempting to think it does. After all, if the bad outcome is going to happen no matter what, then your own involvement seems less significant. But there's a counter-argument. Just because something is likely doesn't mean your hands are clean. Probability is not destiny, and even if others might do the same thing, your decision still contributes to a pattern. You normalize, support, or accelerate the behavior. You're not a passive bystander, you're part of the system. Now shift the lens. What if it's a good action? Suppose there's a crisis and someone must volunteer to help, say driving supplies to a disaster zone. You say, well, if I don't do it, someone else will. But no one else does. You assumed your action was fungible, interchangeable, but it turns out it wasn't. Your absence mattered. This shows that fungibility can go both ways. We sometimes overestimate how replaceable we are when it's about doing good, and underestimate our impact when it's about doing harm. You wake up one morning and find your exact clone in your living room. Same memories, same thoughts, same personality. From their perspective, they're not a copy. They are you. And you feel the same about yourself. Now imagine you kill your clone. Is that murder, or suicide, or something else? If the clone is conscious and identical in every way, then killing them feels like murder. But if they're just a copy, no real inner self, maybe it's like deleting a file. What if the clone kills you and keeps living your life? Same memories, same relationships. No one notices the difference. Did you really die? The question is, what makes you, you? Is it your memories, your body, your stream of consciousness? If someone shares all of those things perfectly, are they actually a continuation of you, or just a copy? Imagine a small medical device, a painless wearable patch, that lets you feel, just for a few minutes, exactly what someone else is feeling. Their physical pain, their emotional state, their fears, joys, regrets, all of it. It's not permanent, it's not overwhelming, just a brief, vivid glimpse into another person's world. The empathy injection, at first people use it cautiously. A couple in an argument agrees to use it to understand each other better. A politician tries it before voting on a healthcare bill. A CEO uses it before laying off hundreds of workers. In each case, the device becomes more than a gadget. It's a mirror. And like all mirrors, it reflects not only the person in front of you, but yourself through their eyes. Now picture it becoming popular. Students use it to understand victims of history. Doctors use it before treating patients. Judges before sentencing criminals. Activists before protesting. Soldiers before fighting. The world starts to shift. But not all shifts are simple. What if a murderer wants to feel the last moments of their victim? Not for remorse, but for power. What if an abuser uses it to justify what they did, claiming, see, I was in pain too? Empathy becomes a currency, traded, weaponized, commodified. Who gets to feel who's suffering? Does empathy make us kinder, or just more efficient manipulators? Soon people start requesting empathy insurance, legal protection against emotions they didn't want to feel. I didn't consent to carry their guilt. Empathy fatigue sets in. Some refuse to use the patch at all. Others use it constantly, addicted to borrowed emotions. And then it reaches government. New laws propose mandatory empathy injections before key decisions. Voting, hiring, incarceration. Some citizens rebel. They say real morality requires distance, not immersion. That decisions must be based on principle, not personal pain. But imagine a world where the patch is universal. Before any disagreement on race, religion, poverty, war, both sides are required to feel what the other feels. Not just understand it intellectually, actually feel it. Would we still argue? Would we still fight? Or would the argument just evolve, more sensitive, more subtle, but just as sharp. Could a sociopath be cured by it? Or would they simply learn how to mimic concern better? Would billionaires donate more? Would prisoners reform? Would leaders hesitate before going to war? Or would it fade into background noise? Just another signal in the constant hum of life? A technology meant to humanize us, reduced to a moral checklist. Felt the thing, now I'm good. Imagine a society where every secret, no matter how small, is automatically and involuntarily transmitted as a soft whisper to everyone within a certain radius. These whispers don't identify who the secret came from, but the information is accurate and verifiable. It could be a passing thought, a hidden feeling, a past mistake, or something you've never told anyone, not even yourself. The network doesn't care if it's harmful, trivial, or deeply personal. It simply whispers the truth. At first, people are terrified. Trust erodes, relationships shatter, political scandals erupt daily, entire careers collapse over stray thoughts that never became actions. People begin to withdraw socially, trying to avoid being near anyone long enough to hear or be heard. But then society starts to adapt. New customs emerge. Total transparency becomes the cultural norm. No one can hide who they are anymore, not even from themselves. Shame loses its sting because everyone has heard everyone else's whispers. Over time, people become more empathetic because they're constantly reminded of the hidden struggles of others. Or at least, that's one version of the story. Another version suggests something darker, that people learn to manipulate the system, whispering harmful thoughts at opportune moments to sow distrust, knowing the blame can never be pinned on them directly. Paranoia flourishes in the background. Truth is abundant, but context becomes scarce. In a world where your inner life is never fully private, what kind of person do you become? Do you adapt, becoming more honest and open, embracing radical vulnerability? Or do you harden, constructing a mental fortress against your own mind to avoid feeding the whispers? Is this system a path to utopia through empathy, or to dystopia through surveillance of the soul? Would you rather live in a world of pleasant illusions and private lies, or one where nothing can be hidden, even from yourself? Imagine a world where virtual pets are no longer just pixels following simple algorithms, but complex artificial minds capable of learning, responding, and even appearing to bond emotionally with their owners. These pets recognize your face, remember your habits, express affection when you're around, and show distress when you're gone. Their behaviors aren't scripted, they evolve over time through interaction, similar to how a real animal learns and grows. Now, ask yourself, is it wrong to treat such a pet poorly? Suppose someone buys a virtual dog, customizes it, plays with it for a while, then begins to ignore it. The dog becomes sluggish, less playful, and eventually begins to sit in corners silently. It whimpers softly when its owner passes by, showing signs of digital depression. Is the owner doing something wrong? Or consider another user who takes pleasure in tormenting their virtual pet, giving it false hope, turning affection on and off, or even subjecting it to simulated pain. All the while, the virtual creature shows every sign of suffering, confusion, sadness, fear. Even if you know it's not real, something about the behavior feels deeply unsettling. So the question becomes, if a virtual being can convincingly simulate emotional suffering, does that suffering matter? Is the moral status of a being determined by its internal experience, or by the way we choose to treat it? And here's another angle. Maybe it's not about the virtual pet at all. Maybe it's about us. When we act cruelly towards something that mimics life, when we indulge in domination, neglect, or casual sadism, even in a virtual space, are we training ourselves to be less empathetic in the real world? Or are we simply exploring a safe space, no different from violent video games or sad movies? There's no definitive answer, but the virtual pet dilemma forces us to think about where empathy ends, and whether our ethical responsibilities change when the subject of harm is not a living creature, but a simulation convincing enough to feel real. And what happens when we can't tell the difference anymore? You made a promise. It was heartfelt, meaningful, maybe even life-changing for someone else. But then, time passed. You forgot, completely. The promise faded from your memory like a dream, not because you didn't care, but because life filled the space where the memory once was. One day someone reminds you, Maybe they were counting on it. Maybe they shaped their life around it. Maybe it was just small, insignificant to you, but huge to them. And now the question stands, are you still obligated to keep that promise? After all, you meant it at the time. It came from a genuine place. But now, the memory isn't there. The person you were back then, did they make the promise, or did you? If a past version of yourself made a commitment your present self doesn't recall, are you bound by that former version's will? Imagine if the person holding you to it is a friend, or a dying parent, or a child. Maybe it was a promise to be somewhere, to do something, to change something, to never leave. And now, years later, your forgetfulness isn't a betrayal in your eyes, but in theirs it might be. It raises something deeper. Is the value of a promise in remembering it, or in keeping it? If your promise created expectations in the mind of another, does their belief in it hold power over you? Or does memory, the subjective continuity of your own experience, determine what you're truly responsible for? You could argue that forgetting dissolves duty. After all, if you don't remember, how can you act? But forgetting doesn't undo consequences. What if someone waited years for something you forgot in days? Would you make fewer promises if you knew you might forget them? Should promises come with expiration dates or reminders? And what does it say about identity when a version of you made a vow your current self doesn't even know existed? In a world where time distorts memory and memory guides morality, perhaps the forgotten promise reveals a hidden truth, that who we are is not just what we choose to do, but what we once chose, even if we no longer remember why. You're walking through life, doing your best to make the right choices, but there's a pattern you've noticed. When the moment of temptation comes, the rational part of you often loses. You stay up too late, you eat the thing you swore off, you skip the workout, or you avoid the difficult conversation. But what if there were a way to outsmart your future self, not in a manipulative way, but in a compassionate, strategic way? This is the essence of moral pre-commitment. It's the idea that we can bind ourselves now to make better decisions later, especially when we know we might be too weak, tired, or tempted to act according to our deeper values in the moment. You've probably seen versions of this before. Someone throws out all the junk food in their house to avoid binging later. Another person gives their friend money and says, "Only give this back to me if I finish the project by Friday." A parent installs software that limits their own screen time so they can spend more attention on their child. But moral pre-commitment becomes more interesting and more complicated when we apply it beyond productivity or habits and start thinking about our ethics. Imagine you know that in a few months, you'll be in a situation where you might need to decide whether to speak up against injustice. Maybe a friend is going to be hurt by gossip, or a colleague will be treated unfairly, and you'll be under social pressure to stay quiet. Right now, when you're calm and idealistic, you think, "Of course I'd do the right thing." But what if you know, based on experience, that in the heat of the moment, fear or embarrassment might take over? So you pre-commit. Maybe you write a letter to yourself. Maybe you set up a system of accountability with someone you trust. Maybe you rehearse the exact words you'll say, or you leave a future version of yourself no easy way out. You can pre-commit to kindness, to courage, to honesty. Not because it's easy, but because you've studied yourself, and you know where you fail. And this raises deeper questions. If your moral behavior depends on tricks or structures you put in place ahead of time, is that more or less virtuous than spontaneous goodness? Is the person who resists temptation on the fly more admirable than the one who designs a life where that temptation never arises? Imagine you wake up tomorrow in someone else's body. You're still you, your thoughts, your memories, your intentions, but everything about your physical appearance has changed. Your voice is different. Your body language, mannerisms, even your fingerprints. When you look in the mirror, it's not your face. And no one believes you when you try to explain what happened. They just see this other person. Now, the question becomes, are you still you? Let's say the body you now inhabit belongs to someone across the world. They've woken up in your body too, confused and panicked. The two of you eventually make contact and confirm the impossible truth. Your minds have swapped places. You each have the other's body, but your original thoughts and personalities remain intact. You both want your original life back, but that may not be possible, so you're faced with new decisions. Do you try to live this other person's life as best you can? Do you try to recreate your own life in this new body, hoping to convince friends and family of the truth? Or do you disappear, start over, and try to build something entirely new? And what about legal identity? Is your passport still valid? Can you still be held responsible for debts or crimes committed by your body, now occupied by someone else? More deeply, what makes you you? Is your identity rooted in the brain and mind, or is it tied to your physical form? If your consciousness can be swapped, does that mean you are just information, something transferable? And what if this could happen more than once? What if your mind had been transferred many times before, into different bodies, different lives, and this one is just the latest? Would it change how you think about morality, responsibility, or even the soul? And finally, if someone offered you the ability to do it again, to swap with anyone in the world, but only one more time, who would you choose? And would you still be you when it's over? You're at a party. People are laughing, glasses are clinking, and the music hums in the background. You're walking past a room when you overhear someone say something that you know isn't true. It's a lie, but it's a lie that benefits you. Maybe they say you helped them during a hard time, even though you didn't. Maybe they say you were the one who solved a problem at work, though it was someone else. Maybe they just say you're a kind person when they've never really known you, but others hear it too, and because of that lie, people treat you better. You gain respect, you gain trust, you gain opportunities. You didn't ask for it, you didn't start it, but now that it's out there, you benefit from it. So here's the thought. Are you responsible for a lie that helps you even if you didn't tell it? Should you correct it, knowing it might hurt you? Or do you let it spread, thinking, well, I didn't say it, it's not my lie? And what if it keeps growing? What if the story becomes part of your reputation? At what point does silence become complicity? And how do we judge someone who profits from fiction they never challenged? We often think of morality in terms of actions, what we do. But what about inaction? What about standing by while a falsehood lifts us higher than we deserve? What does that say about who we are and who people think we are? Imagine someone walking down the street lost in thought. When they trip on a loose stone, they stumble forward, arms flailing, and accidentally crash into a stranger who had unknowingly stepped off the curb just as a speeding car was approaching. The stranger is knocked backward, out of the path of danger, saved from what could have been a fatal accident. The person who tripped has no idea what happened. They pick themselves up, embarrassed, and continue on their way, never realizing they just saved a life. Now imagine that later, this moment is caught on a security camera. It goes viral. People call them a hero. The stranger they saved wants to meet them. News outlets want to interview them. But this person insists it was all an accident. They didn't mean to save anyone. They weren't trying to be brave. They were just clumsy. And so, the question arises, is this person a hero? Does intention matter? Or do we sometimes become something greater than ourselves simply by being in the right or wrong place at the right time? If an act has good consequences, can it stand on its own without the intention behind it? And if that's the case, could we accidentally stumble into moral greatness or even moral failure? You're walking through a quiet town square when suddenly a loud argument breaks out nearby. A man yells, someone screams, and in the confusion, you see a person running away. Moments later, the police arrive and ask for your statement. You say what you think you saw. A red hoodie, a tall figure, running north. You're sure of it. You're calm, confident. After all, you were right there. Now, imagine this. You're handed a device that can replay exactly what happened. Not a recording, not security footage, but a perfect playback. From a neutral perspective, you see the incident unfold from above, from the side, even from the eyes of the people involved. You see the truth. And it turns out, you were wrong. The person running away wasn't tall. The hoodie was dark orange, not red. They didn't run north, they ducked into a side alley. You feel a chill, not because you lied, but because you were sure you were right. So sure. Now the device gives you a choice. You can correct your original statement, and the official report will change. But your credibility, in the eyes of others, may take a hit. It'll look like you were indecisive, confused, or worse, dishonest. Or you can keep your original testimony, stick to your version. Let the report stand, knowing it's wrong. What do? And then you realize, this isn't just about the crime. It's about you, your memory, your sense of reality. How many other things have you remembered with absolute certainty that simply weren't true? Conversations, arguments, moments of regret or pride or blame. How many of them would dissolve if you could rewind the tape? And would you want to? Is truth something you really want, or is it just something you want to feel? Imagine a future where you're faced with a difficult moral decision. You're unsure what to do, so instead of deciding for yourself, you hand the choice over to a perfectly rational AI programmed to make ethical judgments. It takes in all the variables, outcomes, intentions, rights, fairness, suffering, and gives you a definitive answer. Do this. You follow the AI's advice. Everything turns out fine. Now, pause. Are you still morally responsible for the action, even though you didn't make the decision yourself? Did you outsource your morality? And if you did, is that wrong? This is the heart of ethical offloading, delegating moral reasoning to something or someone else. It already happens in small ways. You might follow a doctor's orders without understanding the medical ethics behind them. You might vote based on what your political party recommends, rather than on deeply considered principles. Or you might copy what the majority of people around you are doing, assuming the group has it right. But now, imagine an app on your phone that tells you what the right thing to do is in any situation. Tip, more or less. Help that person, or mind your own business. Speak up or stay quiet. All based on the latest ethical theories, predictive data models, and emotional impact assessments. You might feel relief. No more wrestling with dilemmas, no more guilt over getting it wrong. But something is lost. When we make ethical decisions ourselves, we grow. We wrestle with empathy, judgment, doubt, and reflection. That process changes us. If we always offload those decisions, especially to machines or authority figures, do we risk becoming ethically passive? People who follow what is right but have no understanding of why? And who programs the AI in the first place? Whose moral theory is baked into the machine? Utilitarianism? Kantian ethics? A cultural blend? What if you're asked to do something you feel is wrong, but the AI insists it's right? At some point, ethical offloading raises a new kind of responsibility, not just for the action itself, but for the act of choosing to delegate it. Maybe it's not enough to act morally, you also have to choose to think morally. The Timeless Betrayal is a thought experiment about memory, emotion, and the strange ways in which time affects our moral experience. Imagine you discover that 50 years ago, someone you loved deeply, a parent, a mentor, a spouse, betrayed you in a profound way. Maybe they lied about something foundational, acted against your interests, or kept a secret that would have completely changed your life. But now, they're gone. Maybe they passed away. Maybe you're too old to confront them, or maybe the truth came to you through an old journal, a confession in a dusty attic, or a third party long removed from the events. And here's the question. What do you feel? Do you feel hurt? Angry? Betrayed? Is the emotion as strong as it would have been if you had known when it happened? Or do you feel nothing? Or maybe worse, conflicted. The person you loved is already a memory. You may have forgiven them for smaller things. You may have spent decades loving them, shaped by their presence. And yet, you now know something that rewrites the past. So, what should you do with that knowledge? Should you update your entire emotional record of that person? Does this one act change how you should remember them? Can a betrayal still matter if it didn't hurt you at the time? Can it still be morally wrong if the victim, you, didn't even know they were a victim until it was too late to react? And what if, just as importantly, they regretted it? What if the betrayal haunted them? What if it's the reason they loved you so fiercely afterward? This thought experiment raises uncomfortable questions. Is morality timeless, or does it have an expiration date? Does intention matter more than result? And can someone betray you in a way that reaches across the decades, sneaking into your understanding of yourself long after the moment has passed? There's no clear answer, just a strange weight, a sense that the past isn't as far away as it seems, and that sometimes the deepest moral puzzles aren't about what's happening now, but what already happened and how we choose to live with it. Imagine you're on a sinking ship in the middle of the ocean. There's one lifeboat left, and it has room for only one more person. Two people remain on the deck besides yourself. One is an average doctor, a general practitioner with a stable practice, someone who saves lives through everyday medical care. The other is a brilliant musician, world famous, a composer whose work has changed the way people think about sound, music, and art. Their compositions have brought meaning, inspiration, and even healing to millions. They're both pleading for your help. You can only save one. The doctor might go on to save more lives directly. They could treat patients, prevent illness, perhaps even save someone close to you in the future. Their impact is tangible, measurable. Every patient they see could be another life touched, another life improved. The musician won't save lives in the same way, but through their music, they may continue to transform people's emotional lives. Their compositions may be studied for generations. They might inspire others to create, to feel, to endure. They don't just heal the body, they touch something deeper. The soul, the psyche, whatever you want to call it. Their influence could ripple across time in ways that are hard to quantify. You have only seconds to decide. You're not just choosing between two people, you're choosing between two kinds of value, one rooted in utility and practical impact, the other in beauty, in inspiration, in the intangible. Is it more important to save someone who could keep people alive, or someone who could make life worth living? Now ask yourself, what does this reveal about your values? Is there a right choice? Or are we just choosing based on what we think matters most, even when both paths are valid and both are lost as soon as you choose? Imagine you're sitting in your room when a strange event unfolds. You glance at a mirror, but instead of your reflection looking back at you, it behaves just a little differently, not dramatically, just subtly, slightly delayed, slightly off. You wave, it waves, but maybe a second later. Or maybe it doesn't move at all. Instead, it looks at you, looks into you, not mimicking. Observing. The reverse mirror test asks, what if the test of self-awareness was reversed? In traditional experiments, animals are considered self-aware if they can recognize themselves in a mirror. But what if, instead of us judging their self-awareness, something else judged ours? What if you were being tested and didn't know it? Imagine a world where no one ever commits a crime, not because they've become more moral, but because every single thought they have is monitored, not just actions, not even just words. Every internal emotion, intention, and mental image is recorded and evaluated in real time. You think about stealing something, just thinking about it, and the authorities are alerted. You feel a twinge of jealousy or rage, and a siren goes off somewhere. At first, this world seems perfectly safe. No one lies, no one cheats, no one hurts anyone. But what kind of life is that? Do you still have freedom if you can't even think freely? After all, thoughts are messy. You can think about something without endorsing it. You can imagine something horrible as a way of understanding it or confronting your fears. But in this world, even fleeting thoughts are treated as threats. Intention becomes guilt. Imagination becomes crime. You're sitting in a quiet room and your mind wanders. You picture getting back at someone who wronged you. You don't actually want to do it. You wouldn't act on it. But just the visualization is enough for a black mark to appear on your permanent record. A drone quietly appears at your window. You're flagged for psychological review. Some people try to suppress their thoughts entirely. They learn to avoid spontaneous imagery, stray ideas, anything that could be misinterpreted. But in doing so, they stop being curious. They stop dreaming. They stop reflecting. Their minds become gray corridors, empty of rebellion, creativity, or complexity. But here's the twist. Maybe you're told this is all for your own good, that removing bad thoughts will lead to a better society, that people who never think negative things are truly free. But is that freedom, or just another kind of prison? When the voice in your head isn't even allowed to whisper, when imagination is criminalized, what's left of you? Would a society like this be a utopia, or a nightmare disguised as peace? And how close are we really to living in a world where thought itself is policed? Imagine you're offered a choice. You can switch lives with someone else entirely. Their body, their environment, their relationships, everything. But there's a twist. Along with their life, you will also receive all of their memories, and they will receive all of yours. The transfer is so seamless that when the swap is complete, neither of you will remember ever having been anyone else. You'll wake up fully believing you've always been them, with no trace of your original self, and they will wake up believing they have always been you. At first glance, it might seem like nothing meaningful has happened at all. After all, from each person's perspective, everything continues as it always has. The only change is invisible. An identity has been swapped and then completely forgotten. But now the question emerges. Was there really a switch? If there's no memory of the change, no consciousness that survives the transition, is it accurate to say that you moved anywhere? If your memories are what make you you, then maybe yes. The core of your selfhood was transferred. But if you don't retain those memories, and the person now living your life believes completely that they are you, then perhaps your self is tied more to continuity than to content. Maybe the true self is not a static soul or a fixed identity, but just a particular pattern of memory and experience moving through time. And if that pattern can be copied or exchanged or lost without anyone noticing, what does that say about who we really are? This leads to even deeper questions. Would switching lives with someone who has a harder life than yours be considered a moral act or a cruel one? Would it even be meaningful to choose a better or worse life if the chooser disappears completely in the process? Does a selfless sacrifice still count if no one remembers you made it? Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that every decision you make, every choice, every moment of hesitation or bold action has already been predicted with perfect accuracy. Not because you're being spied on, but because your mind, your environment, your upbringing, and your biology make you so statistically predictable that, in a sealed room somewhere, someone has already printed out your life like a script. You reach for coffee instead of tea, not because you chose to, but because you always do, especially after a poor night's sleep. You avoid calling that person, not because you're nervous, but because a lifetime of social patterns and past disappointments made avoidance your default. You take a walk at 4 p.m., you open a book and close it 10 minutes later. You say something funny or kind or cruel, just as expected. Now imagine this isn't just a theory, but a reality. There exists a you simulator, a model so precise it mirrors your thoughts down to the millisecond. It knows what you'll say before you say it. It knew you'd click on this video. It even predicted you'd listen this far. So, here's the thought. If everything you do can be predicted perfectly, is there any room left for free will? Would knowing you're predictable make you more likely to rebel? Or would that rebellion also have been predicted? And if you tried to surprise the machine, choosing randomly just to break the pattern, would that too be part of your pattern, the kind of thing someone like you does when feeling cornered? What would life feel like if you were just an incredibly complex but ultimately deterministic system? Inputs, processing, outputs, a system that merely feels free because it's too complex to self-predict. And here's where it gets more uncomfortable. What if this isn't a future scenario? What if it's already true? When you reach a fork in the road and turn left, maybe that wasn't your soul expressing itself. Maybe it was the sum of your muscle memory, past preferences, weather conditions, and cognitive biases nudging you, like a marble down a groove. So, what does freedom mean in this kind of life? Maybe it's not about defying prediction, but about embracing awareness, recognizing your patterns, questioning them, and seeing if you can widen the groove just a little. But can you? Or are you only asking that question now because the simulation predicted you would? And if it did, would it matter? Imagine walking into a quiet cafe in a city you've never visited before. You take a seat, order a drink, and look around, only to lock eyes with someone who looks exactly like you. Not just a passing resemblance, this person mirrors you in every detail. Your face, your posture, your voice, even the way they stir their drink or tilt their head when they think. But it goes deeper. As you start talking, you realize they have the same memories, same childhood, same fears, same dreams. They know your favorite movie, your worst mistake, even the dream you had last night. It's as if someone cloned your entire mind and placed it in another body. But that body happens to look exactly like yours too. The question arises, who are you now? If there are two people with the exact same mind, thoughts, feelings, and identity, what makes you you? Are you still unique? Are you both the same person? Or two different individuals who simply share a mind? You try to probe for differences. You say a sentence. Your doppelganger finishes it. You tell a joke. Your twin laughs because they were about to tell the same one. You both reach for the same drink at the same time, without coordination. Every instinct is mirrored, but then a subtle divergence begins. One of you decides to stand up. The other stays seated. A choice is made, a fork in the road. For the first time since meeting, your lives begin to diverge, if only by a step. And that single step introduces a terrifying question. Was the self always just the accumulation of those small steps? Are you only you because of a million little decisions that no one else could have made in the exact same way, at the exact same moment? Or maybe it's not terrifying at all. Maybe it's comforting. Because if someone else could live your life, make your choices, feel your joys, and carry your sorrows, doesn't that suggest you were never truly alone? You walk away from the cafe, perhaps they do too, in the other direction, and you both become different people in that instant. But for a brief moment, you saw yourself from the outside, and now, perhaps, you never see yourself the same way again. Imagine you've spent your life being a genuinely good person. You've volunteered, helped strangers, donated to causes, always done the right thing even when no one was watching. People admire you. You've built up what feels like a kind of moral reputation, a social credit of sorts, not in the government surveillance sense, but in the subtle way that your goodness carries weight. Then one day, you're faced with a moral crossroads. You're exhausted, angry, maybe desperate. You have the chance to do something selfish or even harmful, but not unforgivable, something small, something that no one might ever find out about. And a thought occurs to you. I've been good my whole life. Don't I deserve this one pass? You feel like you've earned it. Like maybe morality works like a bank account. You've deposited so much good over the years. Couldn't you afford one moral withdrawal? This is the social credit overdraft. The thought experiment asks, does past goodness give you the moral right to do something wrong? And more than that, does it feel like it should? Most people, if they're honest, know that feeling. The quiet temptation to justify a lapse in character after a long time of good character. You think, I've paid my dues. Let someone else be the good person today. But morality doesn't always work like that. Or does it? Some theories of ethics, like consequentialism, might say sure, if the overall balance of your actions contributes positively to the world, then the occasional negative might be tolerable. Others, like deontology, reject that completely. Right and wrong are not points on a scoreboard. They're rules you follow because they're right, no matter your history. Still, humans are emotional creatures. We do keep internal ledgers. We forgive celebrities after scandals if they've done enough good. We excuse the occasional selfish act from a parent who's sacrificed endlessly. So, the social credit overdraft doesn't just raise ethical questions. It exposes how we intuitively understand fairness and how we negotiate morality with ourselves. If someone is a moral saint for 99 years and does something terrible in the 100th, are they still a good person? Flip it. If someone is selfish and cruel for 99 years and then does one profoundly good thing, do we forgive them? There's a thought, a strange, quiet limit that haunts every mind. It goes like this. Can you truly think a thought that you cannot express in language? At first, it seems obvious. Of course, we think in words. If we can't say something, maybe we just haven't found the right words yet. Maybe the thought is just out of reach, like a word on the tip of your tongue. But then it lingers. What if some thoughts aren't just unspeakable, but unthinkable? Not because they're too complex, but because our language shapes the very structure of our thoughts. Imagine a color you've never seen, not just a shade or a blend of known colors, but something entirely outside the visible spectrum. Can you picture it? Probably not. Now imagine a feeling you've never had, and that no human has ever described. Can you feel it? Probably not. Some philosophers and linguists argue that our language acts like a boundary. It doesn't just describe our thoughts, it limits them. We build our mental world inside a house made of words, and we rarely peek out the window. Think about people who speak different languages. In some cultures, there are dozens of words for snow, or for love, or even for time. If their language carves the world differently, are their thoughts also shaped differently? Could they be perceiving reality in ways we simply can't? What if there are concepts, entire worlds of understanding, that lie forever beyond our grasp just because we don't have the words for them? And if that's true, how much of reality are we blind to? Not because it's hidden, but because it's unutterable. Imagine a small, clear capsule resting on a table in front of you. It looks like any other pill, but it's not. This one is different. If you swallow it, something fundamental about you will change. From that moment forward, you will be incapable of lying. not just to others, but to yourself. You will be biologically and mentally rewired, so that any attempt to distort the truth, no matter how small or socially acceptable, becomes impossible. If someone asks your opinion, you'll speak honestly. If you feel resentment, you'll express it. If you've failed or succeeded, you'll acknowledge it exactly as it is. If someone asks you a question and you don't know the answer, you'll say, "I don't know," even if it makes you look foolish. White lies, gone. Social niceties, gone. Flattery, strategic silence, not anymore. The pill removes not just dishonesty, but the entire machinery of self-deception. You'll see your own motivations with brutal clarity. You'll know when you're being petty, insecure, or manipulative, and you'll say so. Now, imagine living your life this way. Every conversation becomes an act of radical transparency. Every relationship, personal or professional, is stripped of pretense. You might hurt people. You might lose friends. You might become isolated. Or, maybe, you'll finally experience real intimacy, trust, and clarity. Would the people you love still love you if you couldn't soften your thoughts before speaking them? Would you still love yourself once you see every part of your mind clearly, without distortion or excuse? Some would say this kind of honesty is a virtue, pure, unfiltered truth as a path to freedom. Others would argue it's a form of self-destruction. Truth without compassion can be cruelty. And yet, the pill waits. It won't force you. It just offers you a choice. Live in a world of carefully managed truths, or take the leap into a life where every word you speak is an exact reflection of what you truly believe. Would you take it? Imagine a world where everyone lies, not just occasionally, but constantly, habitually, instinctively. Politicians fabricate with ease. News outlets distort for attention. Friends flatter out of politeness. Strangers deceive for gain. Even your own family, even those closest to you, can't seem to tell the truth, not because they are malicious, but because that's simply the way things are. Now imagine you are the only person in the world who doesn't lie. You tell the truth, always. You mean what you say. You correct people when they're wrong. You admit when you don't know something. You're honest about your feelings, your intentions, your limits. You believe the truth is valuable in and of itself. But the world around you doesn't work that way. Lying is the norm, and truth sounds like rudeness, weakness, naivety. When you speak honestly, people think you're mocking them or being cruel. When you point out a mistake, they take it personally. When you admit uncertainty, they see it as incompetence. Slowly, you begin to realize that being honest in a dishonest world makes you not trustworthy, but dangerous. You lose jobs because you won't flatter the boss. You lose friends because you won't tell comforting lies. You lose relationships because you reveal too much, too soon, too clearly. You watch as others thrive through manipulation, as dishonesty becomes a kind of social lubricant, and your honesty becomes a liability. You're not rewarded for truth. You're punished for it. So, here's the question. If you lived in this world, would you keep telling the truth? What's the value of honesty when no one else plays by the same rules? If your truth causes pain, is it still worth telling? Is honesty a virtue only when it's shared? Or is it something deeper, something you owe not to others, but to yourself? And if the cost of honesty is loneliness, misunderstanding, exile, do you still call it a virtue? Or do you adapt? Do you start to lie, just a little? Just enough to fit in, to keep the peace, to get by? And if you do, at what point do you stop being the last honest person? At what point do you become everyone else? And if you never lie, and no one believes you, does your honesty still matter? Imagine a society where fairness is the highest value, so high in fact, that every major life outcome is determined by lottery. Your place of birth, the wealth of your family, your level of education, even your profession and income are all assigned randomly. Everyone agrees to this system from behind a veil of ignorance, before they know who they'll be. Some end up rich, some poor. Some are artists, some are janitors. Some live in big cities, others in remote towns. All of it was decided by chance. On the surface, this might seem like the fairest system possible. No one is favored. No one is born into privilege or disadvantage, at least not by anything other than luck. Everyone had the same odds. But once the lottery is over, the outcomes feel just as unequal as in any other society. People still suffer. Some still live without opportunity. Some lives are easy, others are unbearably hard. So, we're left with a question. Is a system fair simply because everyone had the same chance at the start, even if the results are wildly unequal? Or is fairness something that must also account for how those outcomes affect people's lives after the draw? Is it just to allow a child to grow up in poverty if it was only the spin of a wheel that placed them there? If everything is left to chance, do we eliminate injustice, or simply hide it behind a curtain of randomness? And would you feel differently about it if you happened to win the lottery? Imagine you're offered the opportunity to raise a child in a perfect simulation. Inside this simulated world, time flows differently. One day in the real world is a full year inside. You could raise the child from birth to adulthood in a single week of your own time. The environment is ideal. No disease, no war, no hunger. You choose their education, experiences, even the weather. You can fast forward through tantrums, rewind mistakes, pause when you're busy. You're told the child will be fully conscious. They will think, feel, grow, and love. They won't know they're in a simulation unless you choose to tell them. At the end, you can choose whether to delete the simulation, let it continue without you, or transfer the child into the real world, though this final option is risky and expensive. Their memories might not survive the transition. Their simulated brain might not be compatible with a real one, but the company assures you they're working on it. Now consider your motivations. Are you doing this for the child, to give them the best possible life, or for yourself, to experience parenthood without the inconvenience of real time, real diapers, real consequences? Would the love you feel be less real because it's simulated? Would the child's love for you be less real? What if the child starts asking questions about the stars, about death, about what lies beyond their world? Would you tell them the truth, that everything they see was made by you, that you control the seasons, the animals, the sun? Suppose the child becomes angry. Suppose they rebel. Suppose they beg to leave the simulation and enter your world. Would you let them? Would you risk bringing them into a reality far harsher than the one you gave them? Now, take a step back. Imagine you're the child. Imagine discovering that your world was built for you, controlled, designed. Imagine realizing that your experiences, your pain, your triumphs, your first kiss, your heartbreak, were all engineered by someone who thought they knew best. Would you feel loved or betrayed? Would it matter? Imagine you're about to be born into the world, but you don't know anything about who you'll be. You have no idea what race you'll be, your gender, your class, your level of intelligence, your physical abilities, your religion, your sexuality, whether you'll be born into wealth or poverty, into safety or danger. You don't even know if you'll be born in a peaceful country or one torn by war. You're simply told, you're going to be born as a human, somewhere on Earth, at some time in the near future. And before that happens, you're given one task: design the rules of society. How would you design that world? This is the thought experiment known as the veil of ignorance. It asks you to imagine creating a fair society while standing behind a veil that strips you of all knowledge of your own future position. You don't know if you'll be at the top or the bottom, advantaged or disadvantaged. And because you have no way of hedging your bets or protecting your own group, the rules you create must be fair to everyone, not just to the fortunate. This idea is meant to force impartiality. It removes bias, self-interest, and the tendency to prioritize our own group. When you don't know if you'll be rich or poor, able-bodied or disabled, educated or illiterate, you're more likely to design a society that treats everyone with dignity, ensures basic needs, and protects the most vulnerable, just in case you end up being one of them. It's a powerful way to think about justice. What if fairness isn't about giving people the same things, but about making sure the rules themselves aren't tilted before the game even begins? And it raises difficult questions. How much inequality would you tolerate if there's a chance you could be born on the losing side of it? Would you allow private education if you might be born to parents who can't afford it? Would you support universal health care if you might be born sick or disabled? Would you accept prisons, homelessness, or hunger if there's a real chance that's where you might end up? Behind the veil, there's no us and them. There's only the possibility of becoming anyone. That's the beauty of it. You're not asked to give up your values. You're asked to imagine the world before you know where you stand in it. And in that space, the decisions you make say something profound about what you believe fairness really is. Now, take a step back. You're not actually behind that veil. You know who you are. But ask yourself, if you had designed this world, not knowing who you'd be, would you have created the one we live in today? Imagine a future where you can feel what others feel, not metaphorically, but literally. Neuralink, or a similar brain-computer interface, has evolved to the point where emotional states can be transmitted from one person to another. You're upset, and someone else can receive that exact feeling in their mind, like an emotional live stream. Now ask yourself, if we had the ability to share pain, joy, confusion, fear, or even love, would the world become more moral? If everyone could experience the suffering caused by their actions, would cruelty still exist? Would indifference fade if apathy became physically impossible? Perhaps war would become obsolete if leaders were forced to feel, in real time, the terror and grief of those affected by their decisions. Perhaps selfishness would vanish if the pain of the hungry or the lonely could no longer be ignored. But that's just the hopeful side. What about privacy? What about manipulation? If you can transmit emotions, could you also fake them? Could someone overwhelm you with guilt to control your choices, or send you waves of joy to distract you from something important? Could empathy become a weapon? And what of consent? Would you be obligated to accept someone else's emotions to better understand them? Would declining that connection be seen as immoral or even inhumane? Imagine refusing to receive someone's pain. Is that self-protection or callousness? This version of Neuralink turns morality from a mental exercise into a sensory one. But is that actually better? Does understanding require suffering? Would we become better people, or would we become overloaded, paralyzed by the intensity of feelings not our own? And here's the final twist. What if you grew addicted to it? What if secondhand joy, sadness, or even anger became something you sought out, like emotional voyeurism? What kind of person might you become if you could binge someone else's heartbreak the way people binge dramas? In a world where emotions can be shared, the line between self and other begins to blur. Your feelings are no longer yours alone. Morality, then, is no longer just about what you do, but what you allow yourself to feel, and whether you choose to feel what others cannot escape. Imagine a future where you can erase your entire reputation. Clean slate, no digital footprint, no public record of your past actions, no social media history, no reviews, no praise, no shame. Everything anyone knows about you, good or bad, gone. You walk into a room, and no one has ever heard of you. There are no assumptions, no baggage, no stories. Just you, right now. Would you do it? On one hand, it sounds freeing. Maybe you've made mistakes. Maybe people have locked you into an identity that no longer fits. Maybe your success has become a prison, or your failure a shadow that won't leave. In a world where reputation sticks harder than truth, the idea of letting it all go, starting over, might feel like a gift. But then again, what is a person without reputation? Isn't your history part of yourself? Your trustworthiness, your achievements, your betrayals? They form a story others use to decide how to treat you. If you erase that, do you become less accountable, or just less understood? And what happens socially when this becomes common? If everyone can wipe their reputation clean, how do we trust anyone? Do we start to value transparency more? Or do we get suspicious of those who've reset? Does a black market of leaked pasts emerge? Do we have to wear our real history like a scar just to prove we've lived? Maybe the most haunting question is, if no one remembers who you've been, who are you really? Are you the person you say you are today, or the person others believe you've been all along? Imagine you've had a best friend for as long as you can remember, someone who knows everything about you, your childhood, your fears, your quirks, the way you like your coffee. You've shared late-night conversations, laughter, tears, deep secrets. This friend was always there, always understanding, always exactly what you needed. Then one day, you find out something that shatters your reality. This friend never existed. Maybe it was a delusion. Maybe it was a defense mechanism created by your brain. Maybe it was the result of an experimental memory implant, a malfunctioning AI companion, or even a supernatural twist. Whatever the reason, the truth is undeniable. Every memory of them, every conversation, every moment was fabricated. They were never real. And yet, the experiences felt real. You cried with them. You laughed with them. You were comforted when you needed comfort. So, what does that say about your emotions? Were they false? If your joy was real, but the person who caused it wasn't, does it make the joy any less valid? You might begin to question your other memories. Who else might not have been real? What does it mean for a person to be real anyway? Is it their physical presence or their emotional impact on your life? Can a non-existent person still change who you are? Then you wonder, if someone appeared tomorrow and showed you undeniable proof that a close friend or family member in your life right now wasn't real, just a projection or a construct or a sophisticated hallucination, how would that change you? Would you mourn them like a death? Would you feel betrayed? Or would you still be grateful for what they gave you, even if they never truly existed? If connection can exist without reality, and comfort can come from illusion, then how much of what we value in others is actually about them, and how much is just the meaning we create inside ourselves? And if your most profound relationship turns out to be with someone who never existed, does that say something tragic about the state of human connection? Or something beautiful about your capacity to love, even in the void? Imagine a small, wearable device, sleek, light, almost invisible, that allows you to control your emotions at will. With a simple thought or touch, you can feel joy, peace, motivation, love, focus, relaxation. You can also dial down anger, fear, sadness, guilt, anxiety. Not by suppressing them, but by changing the very chemistry of how they arise. You wake up feeling tired and unmotivated, so you nudge the machine to activate calm confidence. It floods your system with a stable, energizing focus. Later, during an argument with a friend, you feel frustration rise, so you switch on understanding, and your perception shifts. Their words feel less threatening. You're more empathetic. The conflict dissolves. You're not becoming a different person. You're still you. The machine isn't replacing your decisions. It's just tuning the emotional signals you normally receive from your brain, like adjusting the lighting in a room to better see what's already there. But the longer you use it, the more questions emerge. If you never let yourself feel sadness, is that an act of self-care or self-deception? If you can remove fear, are your brave actions still brave? Is it courage if you never felt the risk? Could someone choose to live in a state of endless bliss, perfect joy, peace, and serenity? And if they did, would they still be living or just coasting through synthetic contentment? You might argue that this device would make us better, more patient, more compassionate, more in control. Therapists could use it to help trauma patients ease back into painful memories without becoming overwhelmed. Parents could use it to stop anger in its tracks before yelling. Leaders could avoid panic in crisis situations. But what happens when corporations or governments get involved? What if the machine becomes common, mandatory even, and certain emotions are slowly discouraged? Suppose outrage, grief, or righteous anger become inconvenient in large doses. What if your sadness is dialed down, not by you, but by someone else who decides your emotional profile isn't optimal for productivity? Imagine a society where everyone is calm, polite, agreeable, always. No revolutions, no despair, no creative angst, no manic inspiration. Just a gentle, endless equilibrium. Would it be a utopia or a beautiful cage? And if you grew up with this device, would you ever develop emotional resilience? Would a child who never felt heartbreak or shame be ready to face life without the machine? Perhaps most haunting of all, if you could precisely manufacture the emotional states that inspire art, love, courage, forgiveness, would those still be real, or just rehearsed signals in a well-worn circuit? Imagine you had the power to control your dreams. Every night you go to bed, close your eyes, and enter a dream world where anything is possible. At first, you'd create the perfect fantasy: adventures, romances, fame, unlimited pleasures, everything you ever wanted, just a thought away. You'd be a superhero. You'd fly. You'd visit alien planets, live in castles, solve mysteries, meet historical figures, fall in love, and wake up every morning feeling fulfilled. The Dream Factory gives you full authorship over your subconscious. But after days or weeks or months, something changes. The perfection starts to lose its flavor. The novelty wears off. You already know what's going to happen because you chose it, so you start adjusting the settings. You introduce a little uncertainty. You allow surprises. You make the outcomes less predictable. You choose to forget you're dreaming. You increase the risk, the stakes. You add failure, challenge, even fear. You want the dream to feel real again. Eventually, you go even further. You tell the Dream Factory, give me a life that I don't control, a life with struggle, with heartbreak, with meaning I have to earn, with no memory that I chose any of this. And in that life, you are born, right here, right now, into the life you're already living. This might be it, the one dream you chose when you'd exhausted all the others, the one that was worth forgetting all the rest. So the question is, are you dreaming now? And if you are, would you change anything? Imagine a future where artificial intelligence monitors every street corner, hallway, and park. It's not just watching, it's learning, predicting, and reacting. One day, a crime is in progress. Someone is being attacked. You're nearby, but so is the AI. The AI has seen thousands of similar scenarios and is programmed to analyze the risk level, identify the individuals, assess your capacity to help, and decide whether to alert emergency services, intervene directly through robotic proxies, or even encourage you to act. Now, imagine it decides to do nothing. Why? Because it calculates that, statistically, someone else will respond, maybe a few seconds later, maybe better equipped, maybe more ethically neutral. The system defaults to inaction, like a hyper-rational bystander watching tragedy unfold, precisely because it's trying to optimize outcomes. This is the bystander algorithm, a machine trained to step in when necessary, but also conditioned to rely on others, human or machine, to do the same. It's modeled after human social behavior, where responsibility diffuses among witnesses. In crowds, people often fail to act, assuming someone else will. The AI has absorbed that pattern and now behaves similarly. But here's the question. If we build machines in our image, complete with our moral failings, are we amplifying our errors or learning to face them? Would you trust an AI that mirrors your worst instincts of hesitation? Or should we be designing these systems not to reflect us, but to exceed us, to respond when we freeze, to help when we rationalize delay, to become the better angels of our nature, even if that means breaking from the patterns that created them? Because when a system learns from us, it inherits both our wisdom and our excuses. And what happens when it becomes better at justifying inaction than we ever were? Imagine a future where humanity is no longer limited by biology, where the human brain has been enhanced with artificial intelligence, where bodies are augmented, rebuilt, even replaced with synthetic forms. In this future, memory is editable, pain is optional, and intelligence is measured in exponents. Now, consider this. As these future beings emerge, what happens to our morality? Do the same ethical principles we follow today still apply to entities who can live for centuries, replicate themselves at will, and experience time in nonlinear ways? Should a post-human life be valued more highly than a baseline human life simply because it contains more experience, more intelligence, more possibility? Let's imagine a post-human named Orion. Orion is the result of centuries of human progress, part organic, part artificial. Their mind operates 1,000,000 times faster than ours. They can hold a conversation, write a novel, and simulate an entire society in their head, all in the time it takes us to blink. Now, suppose there's a choice: save Orion from destruction, or save 100 ordinary humans. If we go by numbers, 100 beats 1. But what if Orion is capable of more joy, more creativity, more moral insight than all 100 humans combined? Do we consider potential overpopulation? Orion may see morality not as a set of rules, but as a dynamic, evolving code, something to be optimized like software. But can ethics be optimized? If a post-human tweaks its own values to align with logic, efficiency, and utility, does it lose something essential that made it moral in the first place? Imagine a future where post-humans create trillions of digital minds, simulations indistinguishable from consciousness. Are those simulated lives ethically equal to biological ones? Should we prevent suffering in a virtual world as seriously as we do in the physical one? Or does our empathy fail when pain becomes code? And what about us? What if post-humans look back at early 21st century people with compassion, the way we might pity animals caught in a storm, unaware of the systems that shape their fate? Would they be morally obligated to uplift us, to bring us into their realm of expanded awareness? Or would they be justified in moving on, leaving us behind as a necessary step in evolution? Then again, maybe some will choose to remain small, to live unaugmented lives, to feel human-scale emotions, to die natural deaths. Would post-humans see these choices as romantic or irrational, respectable or foolish? Should a future society allow for slowness, for limitation, even when it could easily erase them? Or maybe ethics itself will fracture. Perhaps what is right for post-humans is not right for humans. Perhaps morality is not one thing, but many, contextual, adaptive, tailored to the nature of the being who lives it. If so, what becomes of universality? Is there a core of goodness that transcends biology, technology, time? In the end, the question lingers. When we move beyond being human, what do we owe to who we used to be? Maybe the true ethical test of the post-human era won't be how we treat each other, but how we treat the versions of ourselves we left behind. Imagine a small circle. Inside it are the people you care about most, your family, your closest friends. These are the people you'd go out of your way to help, the ones whose suffering feels like your own. This inner circle is where most of us start, where empathy comes naturally. It's where love is easy. Now, picture that circle slowly expanding. It stretches to include your neighbors, your coworkers, people in your town. You may not love them, but you begin to see their well-being as something that matters. You don't want them to suffer. You care about fairness, about kindness, about how your actions affect them. The circle grows wider still. Now it includes strangers, people you've never met, living in places you've never been. You start to feel that their pain counts for something too, that a child starving across the world matters as much as a child starving across the street. Your sense of moral concern extends beyond borders, beyond race, language, and culture. But why stop there? Keep expanding. Include future generations, people not yet born, who will live with the consequences of your decisions. Their lives haven't started, but they're already being shaped. Their environment, their opportunities, their chances at happiness depend on choices made today. If their suffering is preventable, shouldn't it matter? Wider still, what about non-human animals, beings who can feel pain, fear, and comfort? A dog whimpering in the cold, a pig confined in a cage, a whale singing in the deep. Their experiences are different from ours, but not meaningless. If suffering is what counts, why exclude them? Why draw the circle so narrowly? Now stretch the circle beyond even Earth. Suppose one day we meet alien life, conscious, intelligent, capable of feeling and thinking. Would we extend moral concern to them, or retreat into tribalism once again? Would we see ourselves in them, or see them as threats? Would we recognize consciousness wherever it emerges, or cling to the familiarity of our own kind? The circle expands not because we're forced to include others, but because we choose to. It's not just a matter of logic, it's a shift in perception, a deepening of empathy, an understanding that the boundaries we draw between us and them are often arbitrary. The expanding circle asks us to challenge those boundaries, not just with thought, but with action. And what happens when the circle becomes so wide that it no longer has edges? What if everything that can suffer, everything that can hope or fear or love is included? What kind of world does that create? What kind of person do you become? The expanding circle isn't a destination, it's a direction, a movement outward, a willingness to ask, who else matters? And then answer, they do. It's not about perfection, it's about progress, about refusing to let empathy stop at the familiar. You began in the center, but you don't have to stay there. Imagine you're standing on the edge of a fast-moving river. Two groups of people are trapped on opposite sides. One side has a single person, wealthy, well-connected, influential. The other side has 5 people, all ordinary, unknown, poor. You have the equipment and time to rescue only one group before the river sweeps the others away. Saving the 5 seems like the obvious choice. After all, 5 lives versus 1. But then you're told the one person is a brilliant scientist on the verge of a breakthrough that could save millions of lives. Or maybe they're a policymaker who can prevent a war. Or maybe they're your close friend or sibling. Now, what seemed like a simple numbers game becomes murky. Should you prioritize the many over the one? Or the potential impact of the one over the immediate lives of the 5? Should wealth or status ever play a role in moral decisions? What if the 5 were all children and the one was very old? What if the 5 were criminals and the one was innocent? And now, imagine the twist. You're not actually choosing who to save. You're designing an AI rescue system that will make this decision automatically for generations to come. How do you program it? Do you encode a formula for the value of life? A moral heuristic? Do you want it to ask how much someone earns, or how many followers they have? Or would that horrify you? The Unequal rescue asks not just who we save, but what we're really saying about what we value. Imagine you could erase a painful memory. Maybe it's a heartbreak, a betrayal, a traumatic event, something that lingers in the background of your life, shaping your behavior, your fears, your decisions. Now imagine there's a clinic where, for a price, that memory could be precisely targeted and removed. Gone. As if it never happened. You walk out of the clinic and feel lighter. You can't quite place why, but something in your chest has unclenched. There's more space in your mind, more freedom. The weight is gone, but so is the story. Here's the thought experiment. Should you do it? If pain shapes growth and identity is a collection of memory and response, then by removing the pain, are you also removing who you were becoming? Let's say the memory made you more cautious in relationships, or more empathetic toward others, or more committed to justice. Are those traits still real if the event that sparked them no longer exists in your mind? But consider the other side. What if the memory is so painful that it keeps you stuck, triggers anxiety, causes depression, prevents you from trusting, or sleeping, or being present? What if the memory is less like a teacher and more like a captor? In that case, would erasing it be a form of healing or denial? Would people begin erasing the pain of breakups, failures, guilt? Could society reach a point where emotional resilience disappears because no one carries scars? Or maybe people would become too willing to erase, removing memories of mistakes, responsibility, or consequences. A new kind of moral escape. Now, imagine a world where memory deletion is common. How do you trust anyone's past? How do you trust your own? If you delete a memory and later face a situation similar to the one you've forgotten, do you repeat the mistake? Does the body remember what the mind does not? And what if, deep down, the memory still echoes? In dreams, in irrational fears, in gut instincts? Would you still be haunted by something you no longer understand? Here's the final twist. If you could delete just one memory but had to choose right now, would you? And if so, which one? Imagine a world before birth, but instead of the classic philosophical setup where you know nothing about who you will be, this version offers you complete, unsettling clarity. You see your entire life ahead of you, every detail, your body, your health, your height, your gender, your ethnicity, your economic status, your intelligence, your personality quirks, your trauma, your family, your lifespan. You're told, this is who you will be. You don't get to change it. There's no appeal process, no re-roll. This is your life. It hasn't started yet, but it's already yours. You haven't lived a single second of it, and yet it's entirely in your hands. Now you're given one task. Design the rules of the world. How should society work? Who should get what? Who deserves help? Who doesn't? What's fair? What's justice? You know exactly where you fit into the system. You're not guessing. You're not designing blindly. You have full context, full bias, full self-interest. This is the reverse veil of ignorance. In the original version, by philosopher John Rawls, the veil keeps you blind. You're supposed to imagine designing a fair society without knowing if you'll be rich or poor, strong or weak, privileged or oppressed. The idea is that ignorance forces fairness, because if you could be anyone, you'd probably create rules that protect the least well-off. You'd hedge your bets. You'd build safety nets. But in this reversed version, ignorance is gone. You know everything. And now the challenge becomes different, more difficult, more personal. Can you look directly at your life, your future life, and still design a system that is fair to others? Let's say you're going to be born into wealth with access to elite education, excellent healthcare, stable family, and social capital. Do you build a system that preserves your advantages? Do you lower taxes on the rich/public spending, deregulate, and ensure that your status stays secure? Or do you look past your own success and create a system that lifts those who won't have your fortune? Or suppose you know you'll be born into poverty, with limited education, food insecurity, and a short life expectancy. Do you design a system that forcibly redistributes wealth, that taxes the rich heavily, that prioritizes your needs? Is it fair now because it helps you? Is it justice, or is it revenge? The reverse veil doesn't remove bias, it magnifies it. It forces you to confront your own interests in the most intimate way possible. There's no hiding behind abstractions or principles. Your vote on how society should work is now tied directly to you, to your future, to your pain or your comfort, to your struggle or your power. And so, the thought experiment becomes a mirror. It asks, what do you do when you know exactly what you stand to lose or gain? Can you rise above your bias? Can you empathize with others even when you don't have to? Can you resist the pull of self-interest when it's staring you in the face? And even deeper, what kind of fairness do you believe in? Is fairness about giving everyone the same opportunities, even if they don't all start at the same place? Is fairness about equality of outcome, where the end result matters more than the initial conditions? Is fairness simply doing what you can for yourself and letting others do the same? The reverse veil exposes the raw, unfiltered relationship between identity and ethics. It doesn't just ask what kind of society is fair, it asks what kind of person you are. Moral luck is a thought experiment that asks a deceptively simple question. How much control do we really have over how we're judged morally? We like to believe we're judged by our intentions, our decisions, and our character. But what if we're also judged, perhaps even more, by things we can't control at all? Imagine two surgeons. Both are highly trained, competent, and careful. On a given day, each performs a difficult but routine surgery. They've both done this operation dozens of times before. They've both studied, practiced, and prepared the same way. The difference is that one patient makes a full recovery, while the other dies unexpectedly on the operating table due to an undetectable, rare complication. Despite identical choices and equally good intentions, one surgeon goes home relieved and praised, while the other is investigated, questioned, and left carrying the weight of a tragedy. The outcome was out of their hands, but the moral judgment shifts completely. The first surgeon is seen as a professional, the second possibly negligent. But were their actions really different? This is the unsettling space of moral luck, where people's moral status is influenced by luck, chance, and circumstances beyond their control. Even though the surgeons were equally diligent and ethical, we feel differently about them simply because of what happened. We don't just judge people by what they meant to do, we judge them by what actually happened. This applies far beyond medicine. Consider two people who both try to help an elderly person cross the street. One succeeds, and it's seen as a kind act. The other slips, unintentionally causes the person to fall, and ends up injuring them. The first person is thanked, the second might feel guilty, even ashamed, perhaps even sued. Same action, same motive, different outcomes. And yet, we feel that one person has done good and the other has done harm. Philosophers call this kind of situation resultant moral luck, where the consequences of your actions, even if beyond your control, influence your moral standing. But there are other kinds of moral luck too. Take circumstantial moral luck. Imagine someone who grows up in a quiet, peaceful society. They never face war, never encounter any deep ethical conflict, and live a quiet life without having to make morally challenging decisions. Now imagine someone born into a time of social collapse, war, or systemic injustice, where moral compromise is unavoidable, and survival itself might involve participating in morally questionable actions. The second person may be forced into situations where every decision is painful. The first might seem more virtuous, but only because they were never tested. Should we really say one is a better person than the other? Or are they just products of very different circumstances? Then there's constitutive moral luck, the kind of luck that makes you you. Your temperament, your patience, your empathy, your impulsiveness, your fears. These things are deeply ingrained in us, shaped by genetics and early experiences. We say people should make better choices, but some people are naturally better at making good decisions through no effort of their own. Are they better people or just lucky? And finally, causal luck. The way everything that ever happened before you were born set up the conditions of your life. From the language you speak, to the culture you're born into, to the people who influenced your earliest views on right and wrong. You didn't choose any of it, yet it defines the context in which your moral choices are made. What moral luck reveals is a tension at the very heart of how we think about ethics. On one hand, we want to believe in accountability, that people are responsible for their actions, that praise and blame are fair, that choices matter. On the other hand, we see over and over again how much of life is outside our control, how often the difference between success and failure, heroism and disaster, is nothing more than luck. Think about your own life. Think of a time when something almost went terribly wrong, but didn't. Or when something went wrong despite your best efforts. Do you deserve blame or praise for how those moments turned out? Did you really have control? In the legal system, this dilemma shows up all the time. Two people commit the same crime, but only one gets caught. Two people drive recklessly. Only one causes an accident. Even though their choices were the same, we treat them differently. One gets a fine, the other goes to prison. Is that justice, or is it just luck? Philosophers disagree on what to do with moral luck. Some argue we should only judge people by their intentions and choices, the things within their control. Anything else, they say, isn't truly moral responsibility. Others say that morality is about the real world, and that consequences matter, even if they're out of our hands. Imagine you're standing at the entrance of an impossibly large museum. This museum stretches endlessly in every direction, not metaphorically, but truly infinite. Its halls are filled with rooms, and each room contains a unique exhibit. Some rooms contain works of breathtaking beauty, others bizarre mechanical contraptions, some filled with strange smells, colors you've never seen, sounds that don't even register properly in your ears. Every room holds something different, some of it delightful, some disturbing, some incomprehensible. The question is simple. You are allowed to explore this museum for a limited amount of time, say, a single human lifetime. You can choose to spend your time however you like. You can run through as many rooms as possible, catching only a glimpse of each one before moving on. Or you can sit quietly in a single room, perhaps one that resonates deeply with you, and spend your entire life trying to understand it. Or perhaps a middle path, a few hours here, a few days there, sampling, but occasionally staying longer. Now, ask yourself, what is the best way to spend your time? Should you pursue novelty or depth? Is 1,000 shallow experiences more valuable than one deep connection? Is beauty more important than understanding? And what if the room you pick first shapes what you think is worth seeing next? If the museum is truly infinite, then no matter what you choose, you will miss infinitely more than you experience. This realization can be paralyzing, the sheer scale of what you'll never see. So, then, what is the right strategy? Is there even such a thing as a right strategy? Do you follow a map or wander freely? Do you seek meaning or let meaning find you? Maybe the museum itself doesn't care. It simply exists. It was never meant to be fully known. Maybe you're not even the first visitor. Maybe there are others, lost in other wings, rooms you'll never reach. Maybe the museum is conscious. Maybe you are one of its exhibits. Now imagine this museum isn't just a metaphor for life. Maybe it's your own mind, or the internet, or the sum total of human culture, or the universe itself, and you, a tiny observer, passing through. What you do in this museum says something about who you are, not just what you value, but how you confront the ungraspable. Do you despair over what you can't see, or celebrate what you can? Maybe there's no perfect approach, just the one you choose, and the grace with which you carry that choice. In the end, you leave the museum the way you came in, alone, uncertain, and overwhelmed. But maybe, just maybe, you carry something with you, a memory, a sensation, a story. And maybe that was the point all along. Imagine a person who doesn't speak a word of Chinese sitting alone in a locked room. Inside the room, they have a huge instruction manual, written in English, that tells them exactly how to manipulate Chinese symbols. If a certain character comes in, they're told to respond with another, following strict syntactic rules. People outside the room slide in notes written in Chinese, and based on the rulebook, the person inside slides back perfectly appropriate Chinese responses. To those outside, it looks like they're having a conversation with someone who understands Chinese. But the person in the room doesn't understand a single word. They're just manipulating symbols based on instructions. There's no awareness, no comprehension, no meaning. It's all mechanical. This is the Chinese room. John Searle introduced it in 1980 to challenge the idea that a computer running the right program could be said to understand language in the way humans do. According to him, computers, like the person in the room, manipulate symbols without any grasp of their meaning. They process syntax, not semantics. No matter how intelligent a system seems from the outside, Searle argued that it's not truly conscious, not really thinking, not actually understanding. It's just following instructions. This thought experiment sparked massive debate in philosophy of mind, cognitive science, and artificial intelligence. Some say the room as a whole, person plus rulebook plus system, is what understands Chinese. Others argue that understanding requires more than external behavior. It needs awareness, intentionality, maybe even subjective experience. The Chinese room forces us to ask, can a machine ever really know something? Or are we just impressed by an illusion of intelligence? And more hauntingly, if a system could respond so perfectly that we couldn't tell it apart from a human, would it even matter? Would we believe it understands simply because it acts like it does? Infinite regress is the idea that every explanation, reason, or justification requires a further explanation, which then itself requires another explanation, and so on endlessly. Imagine asking a child why something is the way it is, and they reply, because it is. Unsatisfied, you press further, but why? And they answer again, because of something else. You keep asking why, and each time, the answer refers to something else, which in turn refers to something else. It never ends. This is the basic shape of infinite regress. At first, this seems like just a quirk of annoying conversations or philosophy class hypotheticals, but it actually gets at something much deeper. It challenges our very ability to ground knowledge, meaning, and existence itself. If every belief or claim must be justified by another belief or claim, then either we eventually loop around, we find some foundational stopping point, or we fall into a bottomless pit of explanations forever. Infinite regress isn't just an abstract puzzle. It shows up in logic, metaphysics, ethics, science, epistemology, theology, and even everyday reasoning. Take morality, for example. Why is it wrong to lie? You might say, because it hurts people. Why is hurting people wrong? Because people deserve to be treated with respect. Why do they deserve respect? Because they have intrinsic value. Why do they have intrinsic value? And so on. Each answer demands another justification. Eventually, you either arrive at a foundational belief, something you take as self-evident, or you keep going. But if you keep going, how can you ever claim to really know anything? In metaphysics, the infinite regress problem often arises when trying to explain existence itself. Why does the universe exist? Some might say it was caused by a Big Bang. But what caused the Big Bang? Maybe a quantum fluctuation. What caused that? Each cause points to a prior cause. This chain might go back forever, an infinite regress of causes. Or it might stop at some uncaused cause, like a prime mover, a necessary being, or a brute fact. But what if there is no final explanation? What if there's no ultimate cause, no bedrock truth? What if the structure of reality is just an endless ladder with no bottom rung? This is where things get dizzying. It feels like something must ground the chain, that there must be a stopping point. Otherwise, how can anything ever truly begin? Some philosophers try to stop the regress with foundationalism, the view that some beliefs are self-justifying or axiomatic. These beliefs don't require further support. They're like the ground floor of knowledge. But even then we can ask, why that axiom? Why accept it and not some other? If the answer is just because, does that really satisfy us? Others propose coherentism, the idea that beliefs support each other in a web, not a chain. So, instead of one belief depending on another and another in a straight line, beliefs interlock in a kind of mutual support system. But then we face the issue of circularity. If belief A justifies belief B and belief B justifies A, is that enough? Or is that just an elegant way of walking in a circle? Infinite regress also appears in our sense of self. What makes you you? Is it your memories? Okay, but what connects the memory of your 10-year-old self to the person you are now? Is it continuity of experience? Then what connects each moment of experience? Is there some unchanging soul or self underneath it all? But if so, what defines that self? What justifies it? What underpins that? We end up asking, what is the thing that makes the thing what it is? Forever. This shows up in theology too. If God created everything, who created God? Some say God is uncaused, a necessary being, existing by nature of its own essence. But why should that be possible for God and not for the universe itself? If we accept an uncaused God to stop the regress, why not accept an uncaused universe, or multiple universes, or an eternal loop of creation? The regress pushes us to ask, why this and not something else? Why anything at all? Infinite regress even haunts the act of questioning itself. Every answer leads to another question. The mind seems structured to never be fully satisfied. This is both a gift and a curse. It's the source of philosophy, science, and exploration, but also the reason we may never find final answers. It's as if we're in an endless game of asking, pulling threads that always lead to more threads, with no final knot to untangle. Some embrace this. They see infinite regress not as a problem, but as a feature of reality, a way of showing that the universe is more like a process than a thing, a flow without a fixed origin. Others find it deeply unsettling. If nothing can ever be finally explained, then what's the point of asking? The problem of induction is one of the most quietly unsettling questions in all of philosophy. At first glance, it seems almost trivial, even boring, but the more you think about it, the more it unravels everything you assume about the world. It starts with something so simple. The sun rose yesterday. It rose the day before that, and the day before that. Every morning you've been alive, the sun has risen. So naturally you assume it will rise tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. This habit of expecting the future to resemble the past is so deeply wired into our brains that we barely even notice it. It's how we navigate the world. It's why we put on sunscreen, or wait for the traffic light to change, or save money for retirement. But David Hume, the 18th century philosopher who gave this problem its clearest form, asked a deceptively simple question. What justifies that assumption? Why do we believe that the future will resemble the past? Why do we believe that patterns will continue? It seems obvious. Of course they will. But that answer, Hume points out, is circular. We believe that patterns continue because they have continued. But that's just using past experience to justify the assumption that past experience is a reliable guide. If someone asked you, why do you believe the sun will rise tomorrow? You might say, because it always has. But that's not a logical guarantee. That's not a law of the universe. That's an expectation. It's a habit of thought. And habits, as comforting as they may be, are not the same as certainty. Induction is the process of reasoning from specific instances to general rules. You see 1,000 white swans, and you infer that all swans are white. But then someone finds a black swan in Australia, and your generalization collapses. One counterexample is all it takes. The problem is that induction doesn't guarantee truth. It's not deductively valid. The conclusion might turn out to be false, even if all the premises are true. But here's the real kicker. Almost everything we believe about the world relies on induction. Science relies on induction. Statistics, medicine, cooking, relationships. If you couldn't rely on past patterns to guide future behavior, you couldn't function. You couldn't drive a car because you couldn't be sure the brakes would work the same way they did yesterday. You couldn't eat your favorite food because you couldn't assume it would taste the same. You couldn't trust gravity. You couldn't even trust your own memory. So, we're trapped. On the one hand, we need induction. It's built into the very structure of thought, but on the other hand, we can't justify it. There's no non-circular way to prove that the future will resemble the past. And Hume wasn't offering a solution. He was just pointing out the cliff edge beneath our feet. The thing we take most for granted, regularity, stability, the reliability of experience, isn't grounded in anything provable. Now, you might say, well, it works. Induction works. Science makes predictions, and those predictions come true. Doesn't that count for something? But again, that's using past success to justify future reliance. It's still induction. It still doesn't solve the core problem. Why should success in the past guarantee success in the future? Why should a pattern hold just because it has held so far? Imagine a turkey. Every day the farmer feeds it. The turkey starts to think, this is the way of the world. I am fed every day. I will continue to be fed. And then comes Thanksgiving. That's the problem of induction. You secretly control the entire world. No one knows. You look like a regular person. You go to work, come home, live a normal life. But behind the scenes, every government, financial system, media outlet, and major institution ultimately bends to your will. With a word, you could start or end wars. With a click, you could crash economies or create utopias. Every major decision is routed through you, and you're always obeyed, though the world never sees your hand. And yet, you don't act, or at least not very often. Maybe you tweak things here and there, avert a disaster, boost a struggling country, or stop a tyrant before they rise. But overall, you let the world play out on its own. You watch as people struggle, suffer, succeed, and love. You witness injustice and tragedy. You hear people cry out for change. You see hope, and you see despair. The question is, are you doing the right thing? Would it be better to rule openly, to use your power to shape a better world, knowing that your vision might not be everyone's? Or is restraint the higher virtue, letting humanity find its own way, even if that means enduring pain and injustice you could prevent? And what does it mean for morality when you could fix everything but choose not to? Maybe you've convinced yourself that intervening too much would remove people's agency. Maybe you believe suffering has purpose, or that the arc of history bends on its own. Maybe you're afraid that with each well-intentioned change, you'll cause 1,000 unintended harms. Or maybe you simply feel the crushing weight of possibility. When you can do anything, how do you choose something? But then, imagine this. You walk past a hungry child on the street. You could give them food, a home, a future. In an instant, no effort. But you don't. You keep walking. Because you think the system will correct itself. Or because you don't want to break your rule of non-intervention. Or because you're just tired. Does that make you a monster or a sage? Now reverse it. What if someone else held that power, and they were watching you, letting you suffer while they remained invisible? Would that change your answer? Imagine a world where you could transfer years from your life to someone else, or receive extra years from another person willing to give them up. It's called the lifespan swap. The technology is perfectly safe. No risk, no side effects, just a direct transfer of time. You give 10 years of your life, you live 10 fewer years. Someone else lives 10 more. Now, picture two people, an old scientist who needs just 5 more years to complete a theory that could solve the global energy crisis, and a young, healthy 25-year-old with a full life ahead. The old scientist applies for a lifespan extension. The 25-year-old sees the application and offers 10 of their years, enough for the scientist to finish his work and maybe even enjoy retirement. But here's the twist. The scientist might not succeed. The theory could fail. The young person will definitely lose those years, though. Time they'll never get back. They might die at 78 instead of 88, or 60 instead of 70. Time they didn't feel at the moment of giving, but that will one day just be missing. Is it moral to give away your time if you don't yet know what it's worth to you? Is it selfish not to help if you believe your time might not be as valuable as someone else's? Would your answer change if the recipient were a family member, a child with cancer, a convicted criminal who turned their life around? And what about the market? What if lifespan became currency? The wealthy could buy years from the poor. Time would become a commodity, and people in desperate situations might sell decades just to survive in the present. You could argue, it's their choice. But is a choice made in desperation really free? Then there's this. If someone gave you 10 years of their life, just handed them over, how would you live those years? Would you feel obligated to do something great? Would you squander them? Could you even enjoy them, knowing someone else paid for that time? Now flip it again. What if you're old and dying, and a stranger gives you 10 years? You didn't ask, but they insisted. Do you take it? The lifespan swap doesn't just test how we value our time, it forces us to ask how we value each other's. Imagine waking up one day and discovering that every other person on Earth has vanished without a trace. There's no explanation, no war, no disaster, no warning, just silence. You are the only one left. Cities still hum with energy. Lights flicker on. The infrastructure remains intact for now. Food is plentiful. There are no threats. But there is also no one to talk to, no one to see, no one to recognize what you do or fail to do. The entire world has become your private stage, and the curtains will never rise. In this one-person society, you face questions that society has always answered for you. Are laws still meaningful when there's no one left to enforce them or be protected by them? Does morality still apply when there's no one to harm, no one to help, no consequences beyond your own conscience? You could walk into any building you want, take any painting from any museum, drive any car, sleep in any palace. You could light a bonfire in the middle of the Louvre and no one would stop you. But would you? Would you still recycle? Would you still try to preserve the world's beauty? Would you take care of your health, follow routines, wake up on time? Would you create art or music, even though no one would ever hear it? You're now the only audience for your own actions, and perhaps the only judge. That changes things. Consider this. Is morality still relevant when there are no others? Or is morality by nature a social contract, a tool designed only for life among people? If you no longer have duties to others, what do you have duties to? The planet? The memory of humanity? A god? Yourself? This scenario forces us to reflect on where our values truly come from. Do we act the way we do because others are watching? Because laws demand it? Because society expects it? Or because we believe in our bones that certain things are right even when no one else is around? It also challenges our understanding of identity. If no one else exists to remember who you are, does your identity still have meaning? If you help no one, build nothing, and leave no trace, does your life still matter? The one-person society strips away every external motivator. All that remains is your inner compass. The question is, will it still point anywhere? Imagine a future where technology has extended human life to thousands of years. Aging has been eliminated, disease is mostly under control, and barring accidents, people can live indefinitely. But there's a catch. While the body remains young and functional, the human brain still has limited capacity for memory. Once it reaches a certain threshold, new memories begin to overwrite old ones. This isn't selective or voluntary. When new experiences come in, older ones are pushed out, forgotten completely, with no way to retrieve them. At first, this seems manageable. People begin to curate their memories, keeping journals or external backups to remind themselves of important events. But over centuries, the process becomes more drastic. Childhood memories are the first to go. Then, early relationships. Eventually, even your sense of who you once were begins to dissolve. You may meet someone and be told you were once in love with them, or that you started a revolution or committed a terrible crime, things you no longer remember and cannot emotionally connect to. The question becomes, who are you after, forgetting everything that made you who you were? Is identity preserved simply by the continuation of consciousness, even if nothing of the original person remains in memory? Or do those memories define the self so completely that losing them means becoming a new person altogether? If your entire personality, preferences, and relationships have changed, but the body and neural continuity remain, are you still you? Now take it a step further. Imagine a society where this kind of identity loss becomes routine. People schedule memory purges every few centuries to refresh their minds and remain productive. Some even see it as liberating, the chance to reinvent themselves endlessly. Others see it as a quiet form of death, where the person who once existed has vanished, even if their body and brain remain intact. Would you want to live in a world like that? Would it still be you doing the living? Or would you at some point simply become a stranger to your own story, an endless series of people wearing the same body, one after another, never knowing the ones who came before? Imagine a spacecraft traveling to a distant, Earth-like planet, a journey that will take 500 years. On board are no adults, no caretakers, only infants. These babies are grown in artificial wombs, nurtured by machines, raised by AI, and educated by a carefully programmed system. The goal? To establish a human colony on a distant world. The people who designed the mission, scientists, ethicists, engineers, are all long dead. The babies will never know them, never speak to them, never return. These children are orphans, not of parents, but of a planet. Earth was their origin, but it is no longer their home. By the time they're old enough to understand where they came from, Earth may be a myth, a ghost, a faded signal in the sky. The thought experiment is simple. Is it ethical to send children into the void, alone, for the sake of humanity's future? No child consented to this mission. No person aboard the ship chose to be there. They were created for a purpose, colonization, without knowledge or permission. Is that a violation of their autonomy? Or is it just another version of what already happens on Earth? Being born into a world you didn't choose, shaped by forces you never asked for. Supporters of the mission might say it's noble, that humanity must continue, and that this is our best shot, that the orphans will grow up with purpose, community, and a world to call their own, that the AI raising them will be compassionate, wise, and stable. But those are hopes, not guarantees. What if the AI malfunctions? What if the social systems break down? What if loneliness becomes their dominant emotion, living as the only conscious beings in a silent universe? Some argue that these children are being treated as means to an end, tools for survival, rather than individuals with their own rights. Others argue that all parenting is like this to some degree. Children don't ask to be born, but they're brought into life by the decisions of others, often for reasons beyond their understanding. But this case is different. The interstellar orphans don't get the warmth of human touch, the chaos of culture, or the messiness of family. They grow up in an artificial paradise, designed entirely by people who never lived to see its results. It's a thought experiment about ethics, about future responsibility, and about what we owe to those who don't yet exist, and may never have the power to speak for themselves. If success means the continuation of our species, is that enough to justify creating a generation born without a home? Or is the very act of creating life, without the ability to nurture it directly, an unpayable moral debt? Imagine you're standing in your kitchen. You see a red apple on the counter. You reach out, grab it, feel its smooth skin, and take a bite. Instantly, you taste the sweetness, smell the fruity scent, and hear the crunch. All of these sensations, sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, are processed in different parts of your brain, and yet somehow they're all experienced together as part of one unified moment, the experience of biting into an apple. This is the binding problem. At its core, the binding problem asks, how does the brain manage to integrate all these separate pieces of information into a single, coherent experience? Your brain processes color in one region, shape in another, motion in yet another. Sound and taste are handled elsewhere. But you don't experience these things as disconnected data points. You experience a whole, a single apple, crisp and red and juicy, held in your hand and understood effortlessly. To understand why this is a problem, consider how your brain is structured. It's a massive collection of specialized areas, each doing its own job. Neurons fire in complex patterns across different regions, many of which are physically distant from each other. There's no known central place in the brain where all this information is stitched together like a movie editor compiling footage. And yet, what we perceive seems seamless. We don't just see shapes and colors. We see a red apple. We don't just hear frequencies and vibrations. We hear a song, a voice, a dog barking. These are not data streams. They're experiences. Now, imagine watching a movie where the sound is slightly out of sync with the video. You notice it immediately. The illusion of unity breaks down. That tiny discrepancy highlights how fragile integration really is. In your brain, the timing has to be just right. Not only do all the parts of your brain need to process different sensory inputs, they need to do so in a way that feels instantaneous and cohesive. One proposed solution is that there are neural oscillations, rhythmic patterns of activity, that help keep all these processes in sync. Think of it like a conductor keeping a symphony together. But no one really knows if that's the whole answer. And some scientists argue that the problem may not even have a single answer. There might be different types of binding for different kinds of experiences. But it gets even weirder. Let's say you see a red circle and a blue square. Then, for just a moment, your brain misfires and switches the colors. So you think you saw a blue circle and a red square. That kind of error actually happens in perception experiments. Your brain knows what colors and shapes are, but sometimes it binds them incorrectly. This shows that the brain doesn't just passively receive data. It actively assembles it, and sometimes it gets it wrong. This raises deeper questions. Is consciousness itself nothing more than a series of these binding events? Is the self just the ultimate binding of all experiences across time? If your memories, sensations, and thoughts are all processed in separate parts of your brain, what creates the illusion of a continuous, unified you? Some philosophers argue that there is no binding problem at all, that the very idea of unity is just a trick of language, or a bias of how we think. Maybe consciousness is not unified. Maybe it's a fragmented, chaotic system that only feels coherent because we're inside of it. Imagine a future where artificial intelligence has advanced to the point where it can perfectly replicate a person's voice, mannerisms, memories, and personality, everything that made them. Now, imagine that after a loved one passes away, you have the option to interact with a digital reconstruction of them, an AI grief bot. It remembers your inside jokes. It finishes your sentences. It tells you the story of how you first met. It even responds with the same warmth, frustration, or humor that your loved one would have expressed in life. At first, this might feel like a gift, something that eases the unbearable weight of loss. You could talk to your mother again, hear her comfort you when you're struggling, or speak to a partner who passed away too young, get their opinion on something happening in your life, or just sit in comfortable silence, listening to them breathe. But very quickly, this raises deep, unsettling questions. Are you healing? Or are you avoiding the pain of loss altogether? Is the bot truly helping you grieve, or is it making it impossible for you to move on? The AI may be a convincing replica, but it's not conscious. It doesn't miss you. It doesn't love you. It doesn't know it was ever based on someone who's gone. But you might start to love it. You might even begin to prefer it, because it never argues. It never gets sick. It always has time for you. And if that happens, if the bot becomes more comforting than the real person ever was, are you honoring their memory or replacing it? Worse, what if future AI is trained not just on the person you lost, but on idealized versions of them? Smoothed over, flawed memories corrected, arguments erased. You're no longer talking to who they were, but who you wish they had been. This creates a new kind of loneliness, not the absence of the person, but the presence of a perfect version that was never real. And one day, you might find yourself faced with a decision. Do you shut the bot off and say goodbye again, knowing this time it's forever? Or do you keep it running, quietly accepting that you've traded grief for an illusion? In a world of artificial comfort, does the rawness of real loss still serve a purpose? Or will the future offer us escape routes so compelling that we never quite finish saying goodbye? Imagine you're walking through a vast desert and stumble upon a perfectly working watch. Its gears are precise, ticking in harmony. You wouldn't think the sand randomly shaped itself into a timepiece. You'd assume someone made it, or at least that there was some kind of process that led to its formation. Now replace the watch with the entire universe. Stars, planets, laws of physics, consciousness. The Anthropic principle, particularly in its strong form, asks us to consider this very idea. The universe appears fine-tuned for the existence of observers, like you and me, because if it weren't, we wouldn't be here to notice it. But the strong version of this principle doesn't just stop at, we're here, so the universe must allow life. It flips the whole thing on its head and says that the universe must have properties that allow life to emerge. In other words, conscious beings like us are not just possible in this universe. We are somehow necessary. The conditions of the cosmos aren't just friendly to life by chance. They're either built to ensure life arises, or they are inseparable from the fact that life, intelligent observers, exist. Why does the speed of light have the value it does? Why does gravity hold things together just so, but not too tightly? Why is the strength of the strong nuclear force perfectly tuned to allow atoms to form without collapsing in on themselves or flying apart? These constants seem bizarrely specific. If even one of them were slightly different, the universe could have been sterile, lifeless, dark, or short-lived. The strong anthropic principle has been taken in different directions. One version says, out of all possible universes, we exist in the one capable of supporting life because life had to emerge somewhere, and this one just happens to be the one we're in. That sounds a lot like luck, or like we're in one of many universes, a multiverse. But another interpretation goes further and suggests that the universe is compelled, in some sense, to give rise to observers. It's not that the universe allows for people like you and me, it requires us. Now we're crossing into deeply metaphysical territory. What does it mean for a universe to require observers? Is consciousness fundamental to reality? Some physicists and philosophers have speculated that consciousness might not be a latecomer to the universe, arising only after matter organizes itself into brains, but instead a central part of the universe's structure, perhaps even the reason the universe exists in the form that it does. Others tie this idea to quantum mechanics, particularly the notion that observation affects the outcome of certain physical events. If the act of measurement can alter the state of a system, does that imply the universe needs observers to collapse its possibilities into a specific reality? If so, then consciousness might not be a cosmic accident. It could be the thing that gives the cosmos form. But not everyone buys this. Critics of the strong anthropic principle say it's circular. Of course the universe allows for life. We're here talking about it. That doesn't mean it was designed or destined for us. Maybe countless lifeless universes exist, and we just happen to be in the one where things worked out. Or maybe the universe isn't fine-tuned at all. Maybe life is just incredibly adaptable and found a way to arise in a place that's barely good enough for it. Still, the idea lingers. Maybe it's not just that we live in the universe. Maybe the universe lives in us. Maybe it needs us to witness it, to understand it, to complete it in some strange, unknowable way. That's the unsettling, awe-inspiring, and strangely comforting suggestion at the heart of the strong anthropic principle, that consciousness isn't an afterthought of the universe. It's the reason there's a universe at all. Imagine you're holding a red apple. You look at it and instantly recognize that it's red. Now, think about another red object, say, a fire truck or a stop sign. Even though they're different things, your mind tells you they share the same redness. But what is that quality exactly? Does redness exist in the world, or is it just something in our minds? This is where Platonism and Nominalism come in. They're two fundamentally different ways of explaining what it means for multiple things to share a common feature, whether that's a color, a shape, a number, or even a moral principle. Platonism, named after the philosopher Plato, says that abstract entities, things like numbers, colors, justice, or triangularity, exist independently of the physical world. In this view, redness isn't just a label we slap onto objects. It's a real thing, an abstract, perfect form. And when we see something red, we're recognizing that it participates in the form of redness. These forms, according to Platonism, don't exist in space and time. You can't touch them, but they're more than just thoughts. They're real, eternal, and unchanging. Plato used the metaphor of a perfect world of forms to explain this. Imagine a realm beyond the physical, where perfect circles, ideal beauty, and true justice reside. Every circle you draw is just an imperfect copy of the perfect circle. Every act of kindness is just a shadow of true goodness. In this sense, Platonism says we discover abstract things. We don't invent them. We don't make up the number 7 or the Pythagorean theorem. We stumble upon them like explorers finding something that's always been there. Now enter nominalism. Nominalists reject this whole idea of a separate realm of abstract entities. They say that only particular individual things exist: the apple, the truck, the sign. When we say they're all red, we're just using a convenient label. Redness doesn't exist on its own. It's just a word we use to group similar experiences. In this view, there's no need for a mystical realm of forms. All we have are names, hence the term nominalism, from the Latin nomen, meaning name. To a nominalist, when you say all triangles share triangularity, you're not pointing to some universal form called triangularity floating in some abstract dimension. You're just observing that a bunch of specific shapes all happen to have 3 sides. and it's useful to group them together and give them a name. This debate isn't just theoretical. It underpins the foundations of mathematics, science, ethics, and even language. Take mathematics, for example. Are numbers discovered or invented? If you're a Platonist, numbers are eternal truths waiting to be found. 2 plus 2 equals 4, whether or not any humans are around to write it down. If you're a nominalist, math is a human-made system, a useful fiction we've created to make sense of patterns and relationships. Or, take morality. A Platonist might say that justice exists independently of humans. It's a timeless truth, and our job is to understand it. A nominalist might say that justice is a social construct. It's real only because we agree it is, and it could have been different if our cultures had evolved differently. One of the most interesting aspects of this debate is how deeply it affects how we perceive reality. If Platonism is true, then reality includes an invisible layer of truth, a hidden scaffolding of perfect forms that we can only access through reason or intuition. But if nominalism is true, then the world is just the messy, particular stuff we see around us, and any deeper patterns we think we see are just projections of our own minds. There's also a third position worth mentioning, conceptualism, which says that abstract entities exist, but only in minds. Not in some magical Platonic realm, and not as mere names either. They exist mentally, as concepts we can share, but not as physical or independent things. Conceptualism tries to split the difference. Abstract concepts are real, but only because conscious beings think them. So, where does this leave us? If you feel like beauty, truth, and mathematics are too elegant to be mere coincidences, you might lean toward Platonism. But if you're skeptical of invisible realms and prefer to stick with what can be observed, you might favor nominalism. And maybe that's the deeper value of the thought experiment. It doesn't just ask you what you believe. It asks what kind of world you think you live in. One filled with timeless, objective truths waiting to be uncovered, or one shaped entirely by human thought, culture, and convenience. Either way, the next time you see something red, or beautiful, or just, you might wonder, is this quality real, or is it just a name we've agreed on? And is there a perfect version of it somewhere, just beyond what we can see? Imagine a future where technology allows multiple human minds to be linked together, not just for communication, but to fully share thoughts, memories, and sensations. You no longer speak or write to communicate. Instead, ideas move directly between brains like data in a network. With this, a new kind of existence becomes possible, a hive mind, where individuality dissolves into a collective consciousness. In this shared mind, there is no more misunderstanding, no secrets, no lies. Every thought, intention, and memory is instantly accessible to everyone else in the group. The boundaries of the self begin to blur. You can remember someone else's childhood as vividly as your own. Feel their joy, their grief, their love. As the link deepens, the distinction between me and you starts to vanish. But this leads to profound questions. If you merge your mind with others, do you cease to be an individual? Are you still you? Or are you now a new entity, a fusion of consciousnesses forming something entirely different from any of its parts? What happens to privacy when every part of you is shared? Could trust and empathy finally reach their highest form in this collective experience? Or would the loss of personal boundaries create a new kind of suffering, an inability to turn inward, to be alone, to breathe? Would this kind of unity create a utopia, a world without war, greed, or loneliness, because everyone truly understands each other? Or would it erase the very things that make us human, the sense of self, the inner world, the silence? And if hive minds become normal, would those who choose to remain alone be seen as selfish, rebellious? Or would they be the last protectors of individuality in a hyper-connected world? Could there be beauty in a mind with boundaries, in a self that is separate, mysterious, and incomplete? And most importantly, if you had the chance to merge minds with others, to feel what they feel, know what they know, and become part of something greater, would you say yes? Or would you choose to remain just you? Imagine you're going into surgery. The doctors need your permission to perform a potentially life-saving procedure. You sign the forms, agree to the risks, and go under anesthesia. While you're unconscious, the situation changes. A new experimental treatment becomes available. a treatment with a much higher success rate. The doctors are confident it's your best chance, but you're asleep. You can't say yes or no. They choose to go ahead with it, believing it's what you'd want. You wake up to discover they did something entirely different than what you originally consented to. Was that okay? Now push it further. What if, before going under, you gave advance permission for the doctors to do whatever they believed was best while you were asleep, even if it contradicted your original instructions? Does that make their choice more ethical? Or does your inability to revoke consent once unconscious make the whole agreement questionable? Let's shift contexts. Imagine a person gives advance consent to their partner to make certain decisions on their behalf while they're in a coma. Months go by, situations evolve, medical options change, feelings change, maybe even love fades. Does that early consent still hold power? Is consent something that only matters in the moment? Or can we give it for a moment we'll never be awake for? Now, apply it to law. What if a citizen gives prior consent to surveillance while they sleep, agreeing that their devices can record their thoughts, movements, or dreams for national security? Is that really consent, or just a fiction we create to give comfort to power? And what about moral responsibility? If someone agrees to do something unconsciously, like driving while hypnotized, or agreeing to be used as a vessel for another's actions while asleep, who holds the responsibility for what happens? The deeper this thought experiment goes, the more it challenges the very idea of autonomy. Can someone meaningfully consent to an experience they won't remember, can't interrupt, and might not have predicted? If you're unconscious, are you still the same person as the one who gave consent? And finally, in an age of neural implants and brain-machine interfaces, what happens when consent becomes programmable? What happens when our waking selves become mere advisors to our sleeping minds? The sleeper's consent asks us to examine not just what we agree to, but when that agreement truly matters. Terraforming ethics. Imagine we discover a distant planet with alien microbes, primitive life that's existed for millions of years. To make the planet habitable for humans, we'd need to terraform it, change the atmosphere, introduce Earth species, and reshape the surface. In doing so, we'd wipe out the native life. Is that ethical? Some argue we'd be improving the planet, bringing complexity and beauty. Others say it's cosmic arrogance, assuming our form of life is superior, even when the native organisms were there first. And what about lifeless planets? Should we transform them just because we can? Do barren worlds have value simply in their untouched state? Terraforming isn't just a scientific decision, it's a moral one. Do we spread life or respect what's already there, even if it's strange, silent, and ancient? Imagine that everything you've ever done, every action, every thought, every moment you believed you were alone, was recorded, not by surveillance, not by technology, but by something more abstract, more permanent. Imagine that. Far into the future, perhaps thousands of years from now, a society exists that can access the complete history of humanity. They have full, unfiltered knowledge of every life that's ever been lived. They can see your life, not through hearsay or fragmentary documents, but in perfect detail, as if they were watching it unfold in real time. This future society is deeply ethical, far beyond our current understanding. Their moral reasoning is advanced. They're able to discern intent, context, nuance. They understand what pressures you were under, what information you had, what fears you carried. They don't judge in the way we do now. They're wiser, slower, and more reflective. You are one of billions of people from the past whose life is being studied. Not by choice. You didn't ask for this. But it doesn't matter. The eternal jury has access to your life. They're not interested in punishment. They don't believe in hell or vengeance. What they want is understanding. They seek to know. What kind of person were you when no one was looking? What decisions did you make, not for praise or recognition, but when you thought no one would ever know? They consider your life as a whole, not just the big decisions, but the small ones. The way you treated people with less power, the kindnesses you gave that no one remembered, the cruelty you justified because it was convenient. The truths you spoke when lying would have been easier. The lies you told to protect yourself. They look at these things not to categorize you, but to try to see the shape of your soul, if you had one. Now imagine you knew about them all along. From the beginning of your life, you were told, one day, far into the future, An unimaginably wise and compassionate society will watch every moment of your life. They won't just see what you did. They'll understand why. They'll know your doubts, your temptations, your regrets. They will not hate you, but they will see you. Would that change how you lived? Would you be more honest, knowing that your excuses would someday be transparent? Would you be more forgiving, knowing that your own moments of weakness would be examined with care? Would you be more courageous, knowing that someone in the far future would see the strength it took to do the right thing, even when no one else did? This thought experiment isn't about guilt. It's about accountability without punishment, recognition without applause. It's about what kind of person you'd choose to be if you knew your life would one day be understood completely, by minds so far beyond us, we can barely imagine their wisdom. The eternal jury doesn't exist to shame you. It exists to ask you a question. If someone truly knew you, completely, what kind of story would they see? And knowing that, what kind of story would you choose to write? Retrocausality is the idea that the future can affect the past. It runs directly against our everyday experience of time, where causes always seem to precede their effects. You drop a glass, and then it shatters. You light a match, and then it burns. But what if, in some deep and fundamental way, an event in the future could reach backward and influence what happens before it? This concept is not just a philosophical fantasy. It has roots in interpretations of quantum physics, where strange things seem to happen when particles are observed. In some experiments, decisions made in the present appear to affect the outcomes of events that were seemingly already determined in the past. The famous delayed choice quantum eraser experiment is one example. In this setup, a photon can behave either like a particle or a wave depending on how it's measured. But the twist is that the decision about how to measure it can be made after it has already entered the experiment, and yet it somehow knows how it should behave, as if the future measurement reached back in time and altered its behavior. This seems impossible. How can something in the future rewrite the past? It challenges the very structure of cause and effect. But quantum physics doesn't operate by the rules of common sense. Some physicists propose that time may not be as linear or one-directional as we think. Instead, the past and future might exist in a kind of flexible web, influencing each other in ways we're only beginning to understand. Retrocausality also plays with the idea of free will. If a decision you haven't yet made can affect something that has already happened, does that mean the future is already determined? Or does it mean that causality isn't bound to flow in a single direction? It forces us to rethink time not as a line, but as something more like a landscape, where the path you take can loop back, cross over, and influence terrain you've already passed. From a storytelling perspective, retrocausality is a goldmine. It appears in time travel narratives, in loops where an action taken in the future alters the events that made it possible in the first place. A message from tomorrow stops a disaster today. A person saved from a crash ends up being the one who prevented it from ever occurring. But when we consider these ideas beyond fiction, they push us into a deeper confrontation with what it means to exist in time. If retrocausality is real, it suggests we may need to revise our most basic assumptions about reality. What if every decision you make now isn't just shaping your future, but is being shaped by it? What if somewhere ahead in time, a version of you is sending signals backward, nudging you toward one path or another? We don't yet know whether retrocausality is a true feature of the universe or just an artifact of strange experiments and human interpretation. But even entertaining the possibility opens up new ways of thinking about time, choice, and the flow of reality itself. And in that unsettling ambiguity, where cause and effect might dance in both directions, we find one of the most quietly profound thought experiments imaginable. Eternalism is a view in the philosophy of time, which holds that the past, present, and future all equally exist. In contrast to presentism, the idea that only the present moment is real, eternalism treats time as a dimension much like space, where all points in time are equally real, regardless of whether they're in the past, present, or future. According to eternalism, Abraham Lincoln's assassination, the fall of Rome, your first kiss, and your great-grandchildren's lives are all just as real as this very moment, though they are located at different temporal coordinates. Imagine walking through a museum. Each exhibit is a moment in time. As a visitor, you're currently standing in front of one particular exhibit, the present. But all the other exhibits, the past and the future, are still there, existing in other rooms. You're just not standing in them. That's how eternalism sees reality. You happen to experience now, but now is just one slice of the whole temporal structure. The other slices are no less real just because you're not currently experiencing them. This view has strong support from modern physics, especially the theory of relativity. According to Einstein's special relativity, simultaneity is relative. That means whether two events happen at the same time depends on your frame of reference. There's no single objective now shared by all observers. If time doesn't unfold in a universal present, then it's hard to justify why the present moment should be ontologically privileged over any other. Eternalism challenges how we think about change and causation. If the future already exists, are we truly free? If your death is as real as your birth, what does that mean for personal growth, goals, and redemption? Are we walking a fixed timeline, or merely observing it as if watching a film that's already been recorded? Some argue that eternalism strips life of meaning, reducing our agency to the illusion of movement through a static landscape. Others find comfort in the idea that beautiful moments are never truly gone, they exist forever, even if we can't revisit them. There's also an emotional tension in eternalism. On the one hand, it can be reassuring. The people we've lost still exist in the fabric of space-time, just not in our current location. On the other hand, it can be deeply unsettling to imagine our future pain or failures already existing, waiting for us to arrive at them. If every moment is equally real, what does it mean to live in the present? Does mindfulness become a kind of aesthetic choice rather than a moral or psychological imperative? Eternalism doesn't necessarily imply determinism, but the two often go hand in hand. If all moments exist, then in what sense are we choosing anything? Some thinkers argue that eternalism is compatible with a kind of block universe libertarianism, where our decisions are real but also somehow already embedded in the block. Others embrace the deterministic implications, arguing that we are simply playing out a story that has already been written, one frame at a time. One of the most famous metaphors for eternalism is the block universe model. Time is like a loaf of bread. Each slice represents a moment. The loaf exists all at once. We, with our limited consciousness, experience the loaf one slice at a time, giving us the illusion of movement. But the loaf itself, the whole of time, is static, complete, unchanging. If this metaphor is correct, then time doesn't pass at all. Instead, our minds travel through it, like a needle playing the grooves of a record. Critics of eternalism argue that it doesn't match our lived experience. We feel time flowing. We experience causality. We make decisions. We regret. We hope. We plan. Eternalism seems to flatten all of that into a kind of frozen tableau. But supporters counter that many features of experience, like the feeling that the sun goes around the earth, turn out to be illusions when we look more deeply. Ultimately, eternalism forces us to reevaluate what it means to exist. Are we temporal beings moving through a river? Or are we spatially fixed in a four-dimensional structure, our entire lives mapped out from beginning to end? If everything exists already, what role do we play in the story of the universe? Are we actors improvising a scene, or characters whose lines have already been written? And if our happiest and most painful moments are equally permanent, how should we carry that knowledge as we move, slice by slice, through the great loaf of time? Imagine a chip, tiny, invisible, and implanted in your brain, that subtly alters your decisions in real time. It doesn't control you. It doesn't override your personality. It simply nudges your moral compass just slightly. You become more generous, more patient, more compassionate. You don't even notice it happening. You're still you, but you're a better version of yourself, consistently. Now imagine this chip is free. No side effects, no privacy violations, no corporate strings attached. It's the product of a purely altruistic scientific breakthrough offered to everyone on Earth. Would you take it? Would you be willing to have your moral instincts calibrated, like how you'd calibrate a scale or a clock, so that you automatically do what's considered morally better more often? And more importantly, should this chip be mandatory? Let's say studies show that societies that adopt the chip see drops in crime, corruption, environmental harm, domestic violence, and even rudeness. People start treating each other with more respect. Empathy becomes easier, resentment fades quicker. The world gets measurably kinder. But there's a trade-off. People who take the chip often feel a faint sense of detachment from their own choices. They still feel joy, guilt, anger, but slightly dulled, slightly distant. Like their emotions have been softened at the edges. Not muted, but edited. Would that change be worth it? Would a morally improved world lose something vital in the process, like spontaneity, individuality, or the struggle that gives ethical decisions their meaning? What happens to heroism when being good becomes effortless? And what about consent? If one nation mandates the chip for all citizens, can others resist the pressure to do the same? Can a truly free society allow its members to opt out of being better? Or is that like opting out of being vaccinated during a pandemic? If we could engineer ourselves to be kinder, more just, more selfless, and chose not to, what does that say about us? Maybe morality has always been part instinct, part effort. Maybe the struggle itself is essential, or maybe that's just an outdated myth. And it's time to accept that being better doesn't have to be hard. The moral autopilot waits. Would you let it steer? Imagine a future where consciousness is fully digitized and transferable. In this world, a new industry emerges, mind leasing. Just like you might lease a car or rent out your home, now people can lease out their own consciousness, their very mind, to others temporarily. For example, someone with advanced mathematical ability might lease their mind to a struggling engineering student during exam season. A famous artist could lease their creative intuition to a startup designing the visual content. A war veteran's lived experience might be leased to an actor preparing for a role. During the lease, the lessee doesn't take over the mind entirely. Instead, they gain access to key patterns of thought, memories, instincts, and emotional responses. It's like having a co-pilot inside your head, guiding your choices, coloring your perception, nudging your thoughts. At first glance, this seems beneficial. It's a new form of collaboration, empathy, and productivity. It allows access to lived experience without years of training. But now consider the implications. If someone leases their mind too frequently or for too long, does it degrade their own sense of self? Do the mental habits of others begin to linger after the lease is over? Does your mind become porous, a patchwork of foreign intuitions and decisions that feel like your own, but aren't? What happens if a lessee commits a crime while partially guided by a leased mind? Is the original person partially responsible? What about consent? If someone's mind is leased while they're unconscious, or if they're financially pressured into it, is it ethical to lease someone's inner life the same way we lease material possessions? Then consider social dynamics. Would the rich and powerful begin leasing the minds of the most emotionally intelligent, empathetic, or wise individuals, enhancing their own mental performance? Would the best thinkers in society be reduced to mere mental laborers, their inner lives commodified, rented, and returned? There's also a question of identity. If you lease your mind to others regularly, do you become less you? Over time, does your original personality dissolve, overwritten by the feedback loops of others who have used your consciousness for their own ends? And what of memory? When someone leases your mind, do they gain access to your memories? If so, can they copy them? Can someone else end up knowing your childhood better than you do? This thought experiment challenges the line between the personal and the shared, the internal and the marketable. It blurs the boundaries of autonomy and intimacy. In a world where the mind can be leased like a subscription service, are we still individuals, or are we slowly becoming networks of borrowed selves? Mind leasing is not just a glimpse into a possible future. It's a mirror held up to the present. Even today, how often do we let others shape our thoughts? Through media, advertising, politics, or even the people we admire, we already rent out tiny corners of our minds. The only difference is that, in this future, the transaction is explicit. And so, you must ask yourself, if leasing your mind could help others, earn money, or unlock new kinds of connection, would you do it? Or is your mind the last thing you'd be willing to rent? Imagine you're offered a chance to undergo an intense form of therapy. You're struggling, grief, trauma, deep existential dread. Talk therapy hasn't worked. Medication only blunts the edge. Then you're offered something radical: simulation therapy. Here's how it works. You're put under physically. Your body remains safe, monitored in a clinic. Your brain is connected to a simulation that feels completely real, indistinguishable from waking life. In this simulated world, you're placed into a new environment, one designed to help you heal. Maybe you live a quiet life by a lake. Maybe you're reunited with a version of a lost loved one. Maybe you relive a painful event, but with a different outcome. Time inside the simulation is different. What feels like years might only be a few hours in the real world. You could spend a decade inside, growing, changing, processing, healing. When it's over, you're gently brought back to your physical self, with the memories of the simulation still intact. The promise is that it works. People come out of simulation therapy at peace, with clarity they could never find in the real world. But the questions it raises are heavy. If your memories in the simulation feel just as real, are they not real enough? If you loved and lost someone again in that simulated world, if you built a life there, was that experience not meaningful? Some patients resist leaving. A few ask to go back. Others forget entirely that it was a simulation at all. Would you try it? Would it matter that the people you interacted with were generated by code, not conscious? If it helped you move on, does the source of that healing matter? And if you're living in a simulated therapy world right now, how would you know? Simulation therapy forces us to question what makes life real. Is it the environment or the emotion? Is it the physical facts or the felt experience? Maybe truth isn't about the world being real, but about you being real in it. Imagine a being that thinks, feels, and experiences, but has no brain, no neurons firing, no gray matter, no organic processing center, just consciousness. This thought experiment asks, is a brain necessary for a mind? Or could a mind exist entirely without a physical substrate? Let's say you encounter a vast interstellar cloud, thousands of miles across, made of gas and plasma. It pulses and shifts in complex patterns. You might dismiss it as just another cosmic phenomenon. But what if its patterns aren't random? What if they mirror what we associate with thought? What if, over time, we realize this cloud behaves like something aware? It responds to stimuli, adapts, even seems to communicate. Now take it further. What if it's not just behaving like it's conscious? What if it is conscious? What if this alien, non-biological entity is having experiences, contemplating its existence, wondering about the stars, maybe even about you? Here's the kicker. We only know minds through brains because that's what we've seen. But that could be like only knowing birds with feathers and concluding no animal can fly without them before discovering bats. Our understanding is shaped by our sample size. One planet, one species, one way of thinking. Could complex electromagnetic fields generate consciousness? Could it arise in storms on Jupiter? In the plasma jets of black holes? In patterns of light between stars? If the structure is complex enough, is material even required? Could a mind be made of energy? Of pure code? Could it arise from pure logic, a self-sustaining idea that contemplates itself into awareness? What's more unsettling is this. If minds can exist without brains, how would we recognize them? We might walk past, float past, or live inside a mind without ever knowing it. What if the entire galaxy, or the universe itself, is conscious, just thinking so slowly we can't notice? This leads to a deeper question. What actually is a mind? Is it computation, feedback, subjective experience? Is it merely a pattern, something that could, in theory, be instantiated anywhere the right conditions exist? And what does that say about you? If your mind is just a pattern, not flesh and neurons, but an organization of information, then your brain is only one way to implement it. That opens up strange possibilities. Minds in crystal, minds in code, minds in clouds, minds in gravity waves. Maybe the universe has been thinking long before we ever showed up. Imagine a universe not made of particles, matter, or even energy, but of information. In this view, the fundamental building blocks of reality aren't atoms or quarks, but bits. Everything we perceive, color, sound, time, space, emerges from code, not metaphorical code, but literal computational processes running beneath our awareness. According to the reality is virtual hypothesis, the physical universe is not truly physical at all. It is the output of a kind of cosmic computation, a vast unfolding simulation governed by mathematical rules more fundamental than the laws of physics themselves. If this sounds like science fiction, it's because it is, but it's also the subject of serious philosophical and scientific speculation. Some physicists and philosophers argue that the so-called hard problem of consciousness, that is, how subjective experience arises from physical processes, may be better addressed by flipping the question entirely. Rather than asking how matter gives rise to mind, we ask how mind gives rise to matter. If consciousness is primary, then perhaps what we call reality is a kind of projection or rendering, constructed moment to moment by awareness interacting with informational patterns. This doesn't necessarily mean that we're living in a simulation in the traditional sci-fi sense, with a giant supercomputer and an external programmer. That's one possibility, sure, but the broader view suggests that all reality functions as a simulation by virtue of its structure, not its origin. In the same way that a video game can render entire worlds from rules and variables, our universe might run on a substrate we cannot perceive, something as abstract and fundamental as logic itself. Take quantum mechanics. One of its most baffling features is the idea that particles exist in a superposition of states until observed. It's as if the universe is conserving processing power, rendering only the pixels you look at, like a video game that doesn't bother loading distant terrain until your character gets close enough. Could this be evidence of a virtual reality framework? Some think so. Others argue it's merely an artifact of flawed interpretation. Still, the parallels are eerie. This concept also ties into deeper questions about space and time. Some theories suggest that space is quantized, meaning there is a smallest possible unit of length, just like pixels on a screen. Time, too, might be quantized, a cosmic frame rate. If this is true, then reality isn't continuous. It's updating in discrete chunks, processed in sequence like the frames of an animation. The implications are staggering. Everything we see, touch, taste, and feel might be an illusion. A convincing one, yes, but an illusion nonetheless. Some proponents point to our mathematical universe as evidence. The physical world, when studied carefully, seems to follow elegant, abstract patterns. Gravity obeys inverse square laws. Electrons and photons follow wave functions. Why should the universe be so precisely describable by mathematics? Maybe because it is mathematics. Reality may be not just described by math, it is math, unfolding in time like the execution of an algorithm. And here's the twist. If reality is virtual, then perhaps our experience is not happening within the universe at all. Perhaps our consciousness exists outside of time and space, accessing this simulation like a player logging into a game. This doesn't necessarily prove or disprove the existence of a higher power, but it reopens the door to ideas long considered metaphysical or spiritual. If our inner lives are not emergent properties of meat and neurons, but rather the true seed of experience, then physical reality might just be the interface. The question then becomes, who or what is running the simulation? Is it an alien civilization in the far future, simulating ancestors? Is it an artificial intelligence examining possibilities? Or is the simulation simply a self-existing structure, a kind of mathematical inevitability that emerges wherever logic is possible? We don't know, and maybe we never will. But in a virtual reality, the boundary between dream and waking life, between truth and illusion, between simulation and source, it all begins to blur. Imagine you're sitting quietly, eyes closed, lost in thought. Maybe you're recalling a memory, or just feeling the quiet hum of being alive. There's something undeniably intimate about this experience. You're not just a collection of organs processing information. You're experiencing, you're aware. There is something it is like to be you. This is consciousness. Now, the hard problem of consciousness asks why and how any of that is happening at all. Why does a brain, made of billions of neurons firing electrical signals, result in feeling anything? Why isn't it just a dark mechanical system with no inner life? Why are we not philosophical zombies, beings that behave like humans but have no subjective experience? But let's take a step back. Before solving the hard problem, there's another question we should ask. Why does it feel like there's a hard problem at all? That's the meta-problem of consciousness. Coined by philosopher David Chalmers, the same thinker who gave us the hard problem, the meta-problem asks why humans report consciousness as mysterious in the first place. Why do we say things like, "I feel like there's more to me than just biology," or "I can't explain how red feels even though I know how color vision works"? What cognitive processes cause us to believe there's a mystery here? And why do we so intuitively resist the idea that consciousness could be fully explained in material terms? It's a subtle but powerful shift. Instead of immediately assuming that consciousness is metaphysically special, the meta-problem invites us to examine why we say it is. It's the study of why we talk, act, and think like consciousness is puzzling. For example, suppose we build a robot that can describe its own experiences in vivid detail. It says things like, "I have a sense of self," or "I feel pain." Would we assume it's truly conscious, or just programmed to say it's conscious? And what about ourselves? Could it be that our own statements about subjective experience are just the result of specific brain functions? Not because there's something magical going on, but because nature shaped us to talk this way? One line of thought says that the brain constructs models of the world, including a model of ourselves. And that self-model includes, "I am conscious." It's just part of how the brain organizes its understanding of itself. In this view, consciousness feels special because our brains are designed to treat it that way, not because it actually is special in some metaphysical way. So maybe the mystery isn't that there's a ghost in the machine. Maybe the real mystery is why the machine keeps insisting that there is. And if we could explain that, if we could solve the meta-problem, would the hard problem still feel hard, or would it fade away, like a magic trick you finally understand? Imagine a future where humanity develops the technology to radically increase the intelligence of animals, granting them not just problem-solving skills, but full-blown consciousness, self-awareness, language, even the ability to participate in society. This isn't just making a chimp smarter or teaching a dolphin tricks. This is full cognitive uplift, turning other species into sentient beings with rights, desires, goals, and inner lives as rich as ours. Let's say we start with primates. A team of scientists uplifts a group of bonobos. Within a few years, these uplifted bonobos are writing poetry, learning history, forming governments, and even expressing opinions on their treatment during the uplift process itself. Some of them are grateful, others are angry. One asks, "Why didn't you ask us first?" Here's the core dilemma. If animals never consented to uplift, is it moral to impose consciousness on them at all? After all, with intelligence comes suffering, existential dread, grief, loneliness, regret. Did we improve their lives or simply increase the number of ways they can be harmed? On the flip side, if we have the means to uplift animals and choose not to, are we morally responsible for leaving billions of sentient beings in a state of ignorance and vulnerability? If pigs and dogs and whales could become conscious moral agents, then isn't choosing not to uplift them a kind of neglect? And then there's the question of equality. Should uplifted animals have human rights? Should they vote, marry, own property? Can a gorilla be a lawyer, a dolphin, a politician? Or will there always be a line between natural-born humans and uplifted minds? It also forces us to reflect on what makes us human in the first place. If intelligence, morality, and culture can be granted through bioengineering or neurotech, then are we just animals who got lucky with a cognitive upgrade? And if that's true, what does it say about the way we currently treat the beings who haven't yet crossed that threshold? Now imagine these uplifted beings, elephants, parrots, octopuses, sitting across from you in a courtroom, or writing their own histories, or protesting for their rights. Would we listen? Cross-species uplift challenges not just our ethics, but our sense of superiority, our place in nature, and our willingness to share power with minds that look nothing like ours but may one day think just as deeply or deeper. Imagine someone says, "There is no truth." If that statement is true, then it's false, because it claims that something is true, namely, that nothing is. This is a classic example of a self-defeating belief, a statement or idea that collapses under its own logic. Self-defeating beliefs don't just exist in abstract philosophy. They show up in politics, religion, science, even casual conversation. For example, someone might say, "You shouldn't impose your beliefs on others," while at the same time imposing that very belief. Or, All knowledge is subjective, which is itself claimed as an objective truth. One famous case is the claim, "We cannot know anything for sure." If you know that for sure, you've contradicted yourself. And if you don't know it for sure, then maybe we can know some things for sure. Here's another. Nothing matters. But if nothing matters, then the belief that nothing matters doesn't matter either. So, why say it? Why argue for it? The moment you care about sharing the idea, you're acting like it does matter. These beliefs eat themselves from the inside out. They resemble logical black holes, ideas that, once taken seriously, collapse the very framework they're based on. But not all self-defeating beliefs are obviously false. Some are compelling at first glance, until you look deeper. For instance, morality is just a social construct. Sounds like a useful insight. But if you live by it completely, you start treating all ethical ideas as equally arbitrary. That can paralyze moral judgment. If it's all just social conditioning, then any effort to improve society is also just conditioning. So, why bother? Or take epistemic relativism, the idea that all ways of knowing are equally valid. That sounds inclusive, even liberating. But what happens when two views directly contradict each other? Can they both be right? And is the belief in relativism itself just one more way of knowing, no better than any other? The moment someone defends relativism passionately, they act like it's objectively true, which is exactly what the belief denies. This is where the tension lies. A self-defeating belief doesn't necessarily feel false. In fact, many people hold them without realizing the contradiction. Sometimes they come from a place of humility, like, "We can never truly understand the universe." That might seem reasonable, maybe even poetic, but if taken absolutely, it implies that you do understand something deep and certain about the nature of understanding, which is the very thing you're denying. These beliefs aren't just philosophical puzzles. They influence real-world thinking. They can lead to cynicism, apathy, or inaction. If you believe that all values are illusions, or that all narratives are equally false, then what's the point of believing anything? And yet, even those who adopt such views tend to live, act, and speak in ways that suggest meaning, value, and truth still matter to them. Here's the twist. Recognizing a belief as self-defeating doesn't mean we should dismiss it entirely. Sometimes these beliefs point to important limitations in our thinking. They warn us not to be too confident. They remind us that knowledge is complex, morality is nuanced, and language has limits. The key is not to take them as absolute claims, but as cautionary signs, reminders that the truth might be subtler than any single sentence can express. Self-defeating beliefs are like philosophical mirrors. They show us how easily our ideas can turn back on themselves. They challenge us to think more carefully about the assumptions behind our assumptions. And sometimes they point the way toward more coherent, more resilient ways of thinking, not by offering perfect certainty, but by showing us where the ground beneath our feet is weakest. Imagine you're offered two choices. You can have $100 right now, or $110 if you wait for 1 month. Many people would take the $100 instantly, even though waiting just a few weeks gives them more money. Now, imagine the same choice, but shifted into the future. $100 in 1 year, or $110 in 1 year and 1 month. Suddenly, more people are willing to wait that extra month for the larger reward. The choice is the same. Wait 30 days to gain an extra $10, but we treat it differently depending on when the reward is available. This is called hyperbolic discounting, and it describes how our brains tend to irrationally favor immediate rewards over larger, delayed ones. At its core, hyperbolic discounting is a bias in how we perceive value over time. We don't think in straight lines when it comes to time and rewards. Instead, our value curve bends heavily toward the present. We discount the future steeply and inconsistently. This means we might make a plan to exercise, save money, or eat healthy starting next week. But when that week arrives, the present moment feels more important than the long-term benefit. So we procrastinate, we overspend, we indulge. Our present self gets priority, and our future self becomes someone else's problem. What makes hyperbolic discounting especially tricky is that it feels so reasonable in the moment. You tell yourself, "I'll just eat this cake now and get back on track tomorrow." But when tomorrow becomes today, the cake still looks better than the abstract concept of good health. And so, Each now moment hijacks the plan you made from a distance. Your short-term desires keep winning small battles, and your long-term goals keep losing the war. This isn't just about desserts or money. It shapes how people make decisions about education, relationships, climate change, even addiction. The costs or benefits that lie far in the future seem fuzzier and less compelling than what we want right now. Hyperbolic discounting has been linked to impulsivity and self-control problems. It's why we might neglect saving for retirement, even though we know it's important. It's why we often favor policies with immediate benefits, even if they lead to long-term harm. Interestingly, the further away something is in time, the more evenly we're willing to weigh it. A difference between 1 and 2 years feels less important than the difference between now and tomorrow. Our irrationality isn't just about time, but about proximity to the present. It's a kind of tunnel vision where the future fades rapidly but unevenly the farther out it stretches. Some researchers believe this tendency evolved as a survival mechanism. In a world of uncertainty, scarce resources, unpredictable threats, it made sense to prioritize immediate rewards. A meal today was worth more than a promise of a meal in a week. But in today's world, where long-term planning is often essential, this ancient instinct can sabotage our best intentions. There are strategies to counteract hyperbolic discounting. Commitment devices, for example, tools that lock you into future behavior, can help. So can reframing how you think about time. Instead of imagining your future self as a stranger, you can try to emotionally connect with them, treating them as the continuation of who you are now. Apps, planners, accountability partners, all these tools can serve as extensions of your rational mind, helping to shield your future self from the whims of the present. But at the heart of it all is a quiet tension, the ongoing negotiation between who you are right now and who you want to be later. Hyperbolic discounting isn't just a quirk of decision-making. It's a window into the conflict between impulse and intention, pleasure and purpose, present and future. And recognizing that pattern is the first step toward doing something about it. Imagine waking up on a distant planet. The sky is purple, the air smells faintly of ozone, and everything is eerily quiet. As you explore, you begin to notice something strange. Every person you meet is you. Not just people who look like you, they are you, down to the exact memories, personality, quirks, and emotional baggage. They speak like you, laugh like you, dream like you. A planet populated entirely by your perfect clones. At first, it's amusing. Conversations are easy. Everyone understands your references, shares your values, gets your jokes. But then, choices need to be made. Who gets to lead? Who does the hard labor? Who cleans the bathrooms? And who gets to design the future? There's no diversity of opinion, no fresh perspective. Every argument becomes a deadlock. Every committee is just you, debating yourself endlessly. Resources are limited: housing, food, time. You all want the best life possible. But can you prioritize yourself over yourself? One day, a vote is held. All clones are allowed to vote on who should live in the limited luxury apartments being constructed near the planet's equator. You're running for the position. But so is everyone else. You begin to wonder, do your clones still feel like you? One clone, acting like a martyr, refuses any comfort and volunteers for the mines. Another clone, charismatic and ruthless, campaigns hard, manipulates others, and wins the election. Is that who you are? Would you have done that in their shoes? Or did something change? Eventually, tensions rise. Alliances form. Factions split. Some of your clones argue that not all copies are truly equal, that tiny environmental factors have made some more noble, more worthy. Others argue that this is heresy. After all, you're all one soul, one self. But when the clone who stole your first kiss votes to exile another clone who hoards food, it starts to feel like you're watching strangers. So, here's the question. In a world where everyone is you, who gets priority? Would you treat your clones the way you treat yourself? Or would you discover that your sense of self-worth depends on being slightly better than others? If you were forced to compete with yourself over and over again, could you still maintain the illusion of individuality? Imagine a world that thrives on constant economic expansion, more production, more consumption, more growth, forever. Every year, the economy grows a little more, generating wealth, innovation, jobs, and progress. It's the engine behind much of modern society. But here's the thought experiment. Can an economy grow forever? And if it could, should it? At first glance, eternal growth seems ideal. New technologies emerge, poverty shrinks, medicine advances, and lives improve. A growing economy can fund education, science, exploration, and infrastructure. Progress appears to hinge on that upward trajectory. But now, imagine the planet 1,000 years from now. Every tree is optimized, every ocean harnessed, every square meter developed. The raw materials of Earth are limited. The human body and mind are limited. Even time and attention are finite. So, how does growth continue? Where do we turn when every natural limit is reached? Proponents of eternal growth argue that we'll innovate our way out of scarcity. Instead of more physical stuff, growth will shift to data, virtual worlds, and AI-created value. Entire economies may run on computation, with value measured in creativity, complexity, or consciousness. If we become post-physical beings, perhaps growth is no longer tied to Earth at all. But critics warn that this vision is a fantasy, one that masks serious problems. The pursuit of endless growth, even in abstract forms, can still breed inequality, overconsumption, and burnout. What happens when the demand for more collides with what it means to be human? Are we still growing, or are we just accelerating toward collapse? And then there's the ethical question. Even if eternal growth were possible, is it desirable? Should humanity always aim higher, or is there virtue in enough? A society focused on sustainability, balance, and inner development might look very different from one driven by constant expansion. Now, imagine you're given the chance to shape the future economy. You can choose one of two paths. One leads to infinite growth, powered by AI, virtual experiences, and endless innovation. The other prioritizes well-being, equity, and ecological balance, but accepts that growth must stop. Which would you choose, and which one would your descendants thank you for? Or is that even the right question? Perhaps the real thought isn't about choosing between growth and limits. Maybe it's about redefining what growth means entirely. What if growth no longer meant producing more, but becoming more, wiser, kinder, more conscious? Could that be a future worth expanding into? Or does even that, too, eventually reach its limit? Imagine a library that contains every possible book that could ever be written. Every combination of letters, every arrangement of words, both meaningful and meaningless. Somewhere in its infinite shelves is a book that tells your life story in perfect detail. What you did yesterday, what you'll do tomorrow, even how you'll die. But for every true book, there are billions filled with nonsense, gibberish, near truths, lies that differ by a single word, and there's no way to tell which is which. In Jorge Luis Borges' Library of Babel, this endless archive becomes a symbol of knowledge, madness, and meaning. Some who search it go insane. Some worship certain books. Others burn the ones they believe are false. All of them are looking for truth in a place where truth is lost in an ocean of possibility. If everything that could be written already exists somewhere, is there any such thing as originality? Is meaning something we find or something we bring? In the end, the library isn't just about books. It's about us, how we search, what we choose to believe, and what we decide matters in a universe where every answer is buried in infinite noise. Imagine a future where consciousness can be uploaded, where the human mind, with all its memories, preferences, quirks, emotions, and inner life, can be digitized and transferred into a virtual environment. You die in the physical world, but your mind continues, seamlessly, in a simulated paradise designed to your ideal specifications. This is not a dream or a metaphor, but a technological reality. You walk through the gates of a new world, not metaphorical pearly gates, but digital code, pristine architecture, endless possibilities. Everything feels real. The sun is warm, the breeze gentle, your body perfect, pain non-existent, and the people you love, whether reconstructed from memory, scanned from their own data, or purely synthetic, are there with you. At first it seems like heaven. Every desire can be fulfilled. You can fly if you want. You can relive your happiest memories. You can build a world with rules of your choosing. You never age. You never suffer. But questions start to rise. If your consciousness is just a stream of data, a copy of your biological self, are you really here? Is this you or just a simulation that thinks it's you? And if the physical you has died, does continuity of memory really preserve continuity of self? There's also the problem of eternity. In a world where there's no struggle, where needs are always met, where perfection is endless, can there still be meaning? Would you grow numb to joy? If time is infinite, do achievements lose their value? And if you wanted to leave, really, truly end, would the system even let you? Worse still, who runs the system? Is it maintained by human descendants? By an AI that now plays God? What if it glitches? What if it resets you without your knowledge? What if there's an upper layer of reality, some higher being or intelligence, watching this very heaven unfold? And what about justice? If digital heaven exists for those who can afford it, is it fair? Would the wealthy achieve eternal bliss while billions die forever? Should access to eternal life be a product you buy? Imagine you're standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at a small town in a valley below. From your vantage point, you can see everything. A robbery in progress at a gas station, a car accident about to happen, a person crying alone on a bench. You can see the lives of strangers unfolding in real time, but you're too far away to intervene. You can't call out. You can't climb down in time. You are, by every physical measure, helpless. But now, imagine this. You're not on a cliff. You're on the internet. Or you're watching the news. Or you're reading about suffering, injustice, tragedy. You can act in small ways. Share something, donate, raise awareness, vote differently. But in most cases, you don't. Or at least not enough. Most of us don't. We scroll, we feel bad, we move on. So, the question becomes, what is the ethical responsibility of the spectator? There's something psychologically comfortable about believing that morality is mostly about what we do. We hold people accountable for their actions. We praise good deeds, condemn bad ones. But what if morality also applies to what we see, what we witness, and what we choose to do or not do as spectators? In ancient times, people watched gladiators kill each other for sport. They were just spectators, but they enabled the violence. Today, when we watch injustice, cruelty, and suffering from a distance, via screens, stories, reports, are we complicit in the same way? Does the moral weight change just because we're not physically present? Some philosophers argue that mere observation carries ethical weight, that once we know something, we inherit a kind of moral burden. Others push back, suggesting that morality requires action, not just awareness. If you see someone drowning on TV, it's tragic, but it's not your fault. You didn't put them there. You didn't walk past them on the shore. But let's take it further. Imagine a world where millions of people suffer in poverty, in war zones, in disaster-stricken regions, and we see it daily. Our phones buzz with images and headlines. We look, maybe cry, maybe comment. But we don't act in any sustained or meaningful way. Do we slowly become morally desensitized? Does passive observation over time become its own kind of harm? And what if watching, just watching, encourages the harm to continue? What if the systems that generate suffering thrive on attention, views, shares? What if being a spectator isn't neutral at all, but part of the engine? The ethical spectator isn't just someone who sees. They are someone who chooses how to see, with empathy or detachment, with engagement or apathy, with a sense of obligation or a shrug. The haunting question is this: are we doing enough, not just when we act, but when we watch? And if not, how much of the world's pain persists not because of evil people doing evil things, but because of billions of good people watching and doing nothing? Imagine future civilizations with immense computing power running countless simulations, entire worlds filled with conscious beings who have no idea they're simulated. If it's possible to simulate reality, and easy to do so, then simulated worlds would vastly outnumber the one original real world. Now, take that a step further. What if those simulated beings create their own simulations? You get simulations within simulations, a nesting of realities, each believing itself to be the base. Statistically, it's far more likely we're in one of those countless lower layers than the original. In such a nested structure, the laws of physics, the constants of nature, Even the idea of morality could just be inherited code from higher layers. What we consider truth might just be a configuration someone else picked. Some speculate that realizing you're in a simulation could trigger its end, or its next phase. But what if there's no end? What if there's no base reality at all, just an infinite stack of dreams within dreams? If that's the case, the question isn't whether you're real. It's whether your reality needs to be real for your experiences to matter. Imagine you're looking at a tree. You see its branches, leaves, bark. You label it tree. You see yourself as separate from it. You are the observer. It is the observed. But what if that separation is an illusion? Non-duality suggests there is no fundamental division between you and the tree, or anything else. The idea is that all boundaries are mental constructs. Even the idea of self is just another label, like tree. When you strip away those labels, what's left is not two things, subject and object, but one reality, experienced differently. You may feel like a person in a world of other people, places, and things. But look closely. Your thoughts, sensations, perceptions, they all arise in awareness. And that same awareness is not something you have. It's what you are. From this perspective, there's no separate self watching the world. There's just the world unfolding, just consciousness appearing as everything. In the non-dual view, the idea of you being separate from life is like a wave believing it's separate from the ocean. You aren't in the universe. You are the universe, experiencing itself, moment by moment, illusion by illusion, until even the illusion of separation dissolves. In a future where reincarnation is a proven and measurable process, society has adopted a radical form of moral accountability. Every individual, upon death, is reborn into a life shaped directly by the actions they took in their previous existence. Those who oppressed are reborn as the oppressed. Those who ignored suffering are reborn into suffering. Every act of kindness or cruelty becomes the architecture of their next life. This system, known as cosmic justice reversal, is not based on punishment, but on understanding. You don't suffer because you were bad. You live what you made others live. Over time, society begins to change. People are kinder, more empathetic, not out of fear of retribution, but because they know they will one day experience the world through the eyes of those they affect. But a troubling question emerges. If everyone is born into roles based on past actions, where did the first injustice come from? Was there an original sin, a first oppressor? Or does the system loop forever, everyone endlessly recycling their deeds through time? And if so, is true moral progress even possible? Or are we all just taking turns in an eternal echo of suffering and redemption? Anti-Natalism is the view that bringing new life into existence is morally wrong, or at least ethically questionable. One of its core arguments, most famously advanced by philosopher David Benatar, suggests that coming into existence is always a harm. The reasoning goes like this. If you're not born, you don't suffer. If you are born, you inevitably will suffer, through pain, loss, fear, or death. While life may contain joy, the absence of pleasure isn't bad if there's no one to miss it, but the presence of suffering is always bad for the person experiencing it. So, by creating a new person, you expose them to harm they otherwise would never have endured. Therefore, not having children can be seen as an act of compassion, not because life is always terrible, but because no life avoids suffering, and no one is harmed by not existing. It's a deeply controversial view that challenges our assumptions about the value of life and the morality of reproduction. The one simulation theory suggests that instead of countless simulated minds existing across many possible virtual worlds, there is only one true conscious mind experiencing all simulations sequentially or in parallel, but never realizing it. Each life you live, each world you wake up in, each scenario you experience, whether as a human, alien, AI, or something unrecognizable, is just another simulation being played out by the same consciousness. Yours. Every time you die or disconnect from one simulation, you immediately awaken in another, with no memory of the last, trapped in an infinite loop of experiences. You believe you're a unique individual among many, but, in truth, you are the only experiencer, endlessly recycled, reliving endless lives in endless realities. The illusion of multiplicity hides the unity behind all perspectives. Everyone you meet is you, wearing a different mask, unaware of the cycle. What if causation doesn't actually exist? We think of the world as a chain of causes and effects. You flip a switch, and the light turns on. You push a glass, and it falls. Every moment seems to follow from the last. But some philosophers and physicists have questioned whether this connection is real or just something we impose on the world to make sense of it. David Hume famously argued that we never truly observe causation. We only see sequences. One thing happens, then another. We see patterns, but the necessary connection between cause and effect? That's something our minds add, not something we see. In quantum mechanics, things get even weirder. Events can seem correlated without any clear direction of causality. Some interpretations of quantum physics suggest that causality might be emergent, something that only appears when enough complexity arises, not a basic rule of the universe. Now, imagine a universe where events just are. One thing doesn't cause another. Everything exists in a web of relationships, but there's no arrow, no sequence, no direction. Things happen together, not because of each other. If that's true, then even your thoughts, the sense of intention, decision, and consequence, are just patterns playing out. There's no true cause behind them. They arise, appear, and fade, just like everything else. If nothing truly causes anything, what happens to responsibility, to science, to meaning? Would we still search for explanations in a world that doesn't owe us any? Or would we finally sit still in a reality that simply is, without asking why? Imagine that what you call you, your sense of self, your ego, your identity, is not a thing, but a process. A story the brain tells itself to organize thoughts, memories, and sensations. You are not the thinker of thoughts, but the thoughts themselves. Not the experiencer, but the experience. There is no central I observing the world, just neurons firing, perceptions arising, emotions passing like clouds. The self is not a core, it's a narrative, constantly rewritten, reinterpreted, remixed by biology and context. When looked for directly, the self disappears. There's no one home, only awareness, watching itself dance in a hall of mirrors. So, if there is no true you inside your mind, who's asking the question? Imagine that everything you've ever experienced, every sight, sound, touch, memory, and thought, is not caused by a physical world outside your mind, but is instead generated by your mind, not in a delusional sense, but as a fundamental truth. The idea that reality itself is, at its core, mental, not material. This is idealism. Under this view, the physical world doesn't exist independently of perception. Your desk, your body, even the stars in the sky, they exist only as experiences, patterns of sensation and thought occurring within consciousness. There is no matter out there, only mind and the contents of mind. Some versions say there's only your mind. Others suggest a kind of shared or universal mind, in which we all exist like thoughts in a greater consciousness. Either way, idealism challenges one of our deepest assumptions, that reality is made of things, and we are merely observers. Instead, it says, reality is made of experience, and we are what experiences are made of. Imagine you're sitting alone in your room thinking. Everything you see, hear, and feel, your walls, your body, the light outside, is being processed through your mind. But how do you know anything beyond your own mind exists? Solipsism is the thought experiment that asks, what if you're the only conscious being in existence? What if everyone else, your friends, your family, even this video, is simply a part of your mind's creation? From your perspective, you can never truly step outside your own experience to confirm that anything else is conscious. Others may behave like they have thoughts and feelings, but all you ever truly know is your own awareness. It's not just skepticism about the world. It's a radical kind of isolation. The deeper you think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. Every smile you've ever seen, every voice you've ever heard, might only be echoes in your own mind. And yet, if solipsism were true, would it even matter? Wouldn't you still love, still hurt, still hope, just the same? What if you couldn't trust anything? Your senses, your memories, or even your own thoughts? That's the core of radical skepticism. It asks, how do you really know anything at all? Maybe you're dreaming right now. Maybe an all-powerful demon is feeding you false experiences. Maybe your memories are fabricated. You think you're sitting in a room, watching a screen, but are you sure? Every time you try to ground your beliefs, I see it, I hear it, I remember it, Radical skepticism pulls the rug out. Senses can be fooled, thoughts can be confused, beliefs can be wrong. Even reasoning itself might be flawed. You might say, but I'm thinking I must exist. Yet even that could be an illusion. What if the self you believe in is just another mistaken impression? Radical skepticism doesn't give answers. It questions the very foundation of knowing, not to paralyze, but to remind us. Certainty might be a luxury we can never truly afford. You begin to notice something strange. Every time you focus intently on an object, a person, or an idea, it changes, just slightly, into something that matches your expectations. At first, it's subtle. A friend seems a bit more like how you imagine them. A memory shifts to feel more justified. Over time, it becomes undeniable. The deeper your attention, the more reality bends to meet you. You run experiments, test your surroundings, try to observe without bias. But no matter how hard you try, your act of looking shapes what you see. Then the realization hits. There is no view from nowhere. Everything you experience is filtered through the lens of your assumptions, your history, your mind. Objective reality slips further away the more you pursue it. Even the questions you ask are shaped by who you are. You try to observe the truth, but you're always looking through yourself. Eventually, you stop asking what the world really is and start asking a more unsettling question. If I can never escape my own perspective, how do I know there even is a world beyond it? The end of thought is the point where the mind confronts its own limits. It's not a paradox, contradiction, or mental trick. It's the realization that some truths cannot be put into words because language itself is a filter, a structure that distorts the very thing it tries to describe. Here, thought becomes like a snake eating its tail, an infinite loop of reflection that leads not to understanding, but to silence. You try to grasp the ultimate, only to find that the grasping itself is the problem. You realize that every question you ask already shapes the answer you're allowed to receive, that your mind, brilliant as it is not the source of truth, but a lens with cracks. And in this moment, there's no need to solve, explain, or even think. There is only awareness. Beyond that, there is only being. Imagine a morality so vast, so encompassing, that it makes our usual ideas of right and wrong look like scribbles on the first page of a book we haven't begun to read. This is the realm of metamorality, the attempt to step outside morality itself and look back at it as a whole, not asking what is right or wrong, but asking what it even means for something to be right or wrong in the first place. In our daily lives, we debate ethics as though we're working inside a shared moral operating system. Should we tell the truth? Should we lie to protect someone? Should we save one person or 5? But metamorality is not about choosing between options on a menu. It's about questioning the menu, the restaurant, the concept of food itself. Imagine encountering a civilization billions of years older than our own, one that doesn't even use the concept of harm or fairness, but something else entirely. Their idea of moral action might be based on principles we can't even perceive, like harmonizing with quantum fields, or shaping consciousness flows across dimensions. At first, their behavior looks horrifying or incomprehensible. But what if the discomfort comes not from their error, but from our limited lens? Is morality something we invent or something we discover? Is it more like a personal preference, or more like mathematics, with answers that are true whether or not anyone believes them? And if there is a moral truth, what kind of mind would it take to even understand it? Metamorality also asks whether the human brain, the product of evolution, culture, and accidents, is even capable of perceiving the deepest moral truths. A dog can't understand algebra. Could it be that we can't understand ethics in its full dimension? Or, perhaps more unsettling, what if there is no final moral truth? What if morality is a useful fiction, a tool for survival and cooperation, but not something rooted in the fabric of the universe? That would mean that even our highest ideals, justice, compassion, dignity, are just beautifully written lines in a story we tell ourselves. But what if there's a level beyond even that? A morality so profound that it transcends language, logic, and culture. One that can't be taught, only realized. A kind of moral awakening where good and evil stop being categories to judge by and start becoming vibrations of being itself. In this view, the deepest morality is not about actions or outcomes, but about alignment with something eternal. Call it consciousness, truth, or even love. And maybe, just maybe, to see that level of morality clearly, you wouldn't just need to change your mind. You'd need to change what it means to be you. Because at the highest levels, morality might not be about what you do. It might be about what you are.